compared.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Everyone good? We're going to get started. Call this meeting the August 1st work session to order. Roll call, please. No, not to stand up.
Dr. Campley? Here. Mr. Dorr? Is he on?
Not yet. He's trying to figure it out.
You may keep going.
Yep, I'll let you know when he gets in.
Mrs. Evans Brockett? Here. Mr. Fountain?
Here.
Mr. Keenan?
Here.
Dr. Kohler? Mrs. Mayers?
Here.
Mr. Saylor?
Here.
Ms. White?
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. I have a motion. Is there a second? Is there a second? Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Anyone from the public wish to make any comments?
Good evening, Robert Liggett, Perkiomen Township. Wow, that's a lot of feedback. Good evening, and I hope everybody's been having a good summer. Tonight, I have a word of caution for us all. Tonight, basically, two committees are being eliminated, Wellness and Safety and Operations. The work and the issues that are dealt with by these committees is of importance. Please keep that in mind as they get folded into the Finance and Education committees of the whole. As we move into a more efficient, less redundant format, let us strive not to lose depth, detail, public participation, and oversight. The work sessions will now probably be quite long. While I'm happy that there's a possibility that more of the public will be able to both see and participate in committee activities, I'm concerned that we could lose our attention and focus, since this meeting will be longer, and I don't want the public to, or the board to start tuning out because of the length of the meetings. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. This is the advantage of the former system. We will still be eating an elephant one bite at a time, but we're going to have it all at one meal. Having the work session be the place where this committee work happens gives us only 1 week to digest what the committee's actions are before the actions take place. I do sympathize with the board and administration in the time commitment that is needed to attend all these meetings. My wife, for her own reason, would be quite grateful for these changes. One last issue. Dr. Campley and Ms. White brought up during the discussions in June on this topic that some of the committees, specifically policy, weren't broadcast or recorded, and which is one of the advantages of this new system, that the committees will be recorded and broadcast. I would note to you that we can still do that for the committees that are not part of the committee of the whole. Nothing but will prevents us from doing that. And considering that we're now going to have 4 less meetings a month, it seems that that would not be an incredible barrier to overcome. Thank you very much.
Ms. Wonder, Mr. Dorr has entered the Zoom meeting. Anyone else wish to? Dr. Weston? Anyone want? Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. Wade Weston, Collegeville Borough. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I was looking at the agenda for tonight, and I see that tonight marks your embarking on this new committee format and structure for the meetings, with education and finance now functioning as committees of the whole rather than as standalone committees as they have been in the past. I also noticed from the agenda that wellness topics are now being rolled into the Education Committee. And I see from the committee listings on the website that there is no more wellness as a standalone separate committee. And I'm just a little curious and a little concerned as to how this is going to work going forward, and how this is going to be managed. We do have a policy, our policy 246, which covers wellness topics and specifically describes the makeup and the functions of the Wellness Committee. In terms of membership, the policy states that among other individuals, the membership of the Wellness Committee is to include at least one student, at least one parent, at least one member of the community, representatives from district food service, as well as physical education. I'm wondering, I certainly don't see most of those functions here tonight. So my question to the board, I'm wondering if the changes that you're proposing to wellness are consistent with the spirit and the letter of the district policies, let alone, not to mention any legal requirement there may be for having a wellness committee. Is this new structure consistent with these aspects? And if it is, how will these voices that are specified in policy going to be captured in the committee discussions or in the education committee discussions of wellness going forward? And I look forward to having those questions addressed as we introduce this new meeting structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to reports and presentations. Mr. Schaefer, welcome back.
Welcome back. Arshia, unfortunately, can't be here tonight, and I don't have much to say because we've been on summer break, but we're excited, for the most part, to get back to school. A lot of new things ahead of us, and I'm sure most of our students, hopefully most of our students, are excited for August 29th when we're back in the building. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quick President's report. Just want to thank the Cabinet and the administration for all the work they put in to move forward for these new work session and the committees as a whole. Superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Saylor. For this evening's report, I have 3 points of interest that I would like to call out. And Mr. Schaefer did reference one, which is the start of the 22-23 school year, which is right around the corner for us. So once we hit August, we're really gearing up. But I want to give you a recap of summer programming and a summary of some of the numbers and the events for our students. The Educational Equity Task Force, that emerging from policy earlier this spring, was a suggestion to review Policy 832 with some input from individuals from our community as well as our school communities, and then the start of our school year. You see here we have a student who was a part of Mr. Ganesh's tech camp, and they are participating in some virtual activities there. So each month I'd like to refer to our mission and to our shared values, as well as some of the specific goals once our comprehensive plan receives approval. So Mrs. Smith and I will continually come back to those so that we maintain that alignment we're looking for moving the district forward. When we think about Future Ready this summer, we had lots of enrichment activities, remediation activities, fun activities, course recovery activities, extended school year and COVID compensatory services for our qualifying special education students. And you see on this slide some of the numbers of students that participated. We had 665 students register for those enrichment activities, and there was a lot of fun for our students. Here you see an example of some of our students. The enrichment side of things, we had a group that worked with Mr. Ganesh and team to learn how to fly drones. This is a certification that they received to create objects using 3D printing. They also did some coding. They worked with virtual and virtual reality and seemed to really be engaged as part of these opportunities. There were 3 weeks of tech camp, along with some of the other enrichment activities you see listed there in the yellow box on the left. And then, of course, we had remediation, recovery of credits for high school students, ESY and CCS, where the focus was really on core subjects for our students. All in all, it was a very productive summer, and we had lots of students involved. I appreciate the staff and the administrators who participated directly in some of those experiences. So we had our first Educational Equity Task Force meeting. The task force consists of teachers, administrators, parents, community members, and some students. These were the intended outcomes, our first meeting, which was held last week. And again, we are focused on Policy 832 and really moving through some of the steps that have been suggested by PSBA, getting some input from our community. We didn't quite get as far as I would have liked last week. We had some really rich conversation and lots of give and take. So we have a full agenda coming up this week when we meet on the 3rd. We want to review the purpose in the policy, align it to PVSD. We want to look at the definitions of the terms and look to some reliable resources. PDE is one, where again, we can align and make clear connections to why we might be presenting something that ends up being presented in this policy. This week, we want to dive deeper into the policy and engage in conversations around that educational equity audit. That's a part of the policy right now. Last year, we administered the school climate survey after reviewing a couple of different quote-unquote equity audit tools. I'm not sure we've landed on the one that we believe will inform us most effectively, but we are going to talk about that with the task force this week. And then from that information, how do we develop goals and an action plan, and how is that information reported back to our board as well as our school communities? After the August 3rd meeting, the task force is scheduled to meet a 3rd time. I believe it'll be our final meeting. It may not, but right now we've got 3 on the books in the calendar. We are then planning to have a policy with any recommended changes based upon the task force come to the policy committee in September and then to the board for a first reading, potentially in October. So that's right now the drafted timeline for that work. Lastly, the school year is right around the corner, and administration always feels like once we hit August, it's as if we are up and running for the school year. And Mr. Schaefer mentioned he mentioned the first day for students is the 29th, first day for our staff, which is called opening day on August 24th. Our board members have been invited to that morning conclave, and some of those introductory messages and presentations we participate in as a full school community this year at East, just in the morning from 8 to 11:30. That's on August 24th. In addition, we have some orientation activities scheduled for kindergarten for our 9th graders transitioning up to the high school, and to our 6th graders for those transitioning 5th graders to middle school. And then we also posted on our website, Dr. Parr took care of putting a lot of dates on the website. We have our Meet the Teacher nights, which again, just around the corner. So FYI, hoping to get a lot of parents to come out to these orientation activities and really feel excited about the start of the school year, which is, again, before the end of this month, before we meet again in September. And with that, that ends my report.
Thank you very much. Solicitor's report.
I have no report.
Any board members have any discussions on board and district committee reports since we last met? I'm going to assume no, but I'll scan the room. Okay. Consent agenda, we have the following items will be added to the consent agenda for approval on August 8th. They're on the list in front of you, 7.01 to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17, and 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Everyone okay with that? So we'll move on. Little snafu with Dr. Kohler not being here. We're short some board members. Ms. White, do you mind taking this section? Is that a possibility? Thank you, I appreciate it. And I apologize for not telling you in advance. Yeah.
Bear with us since it's first night for this new process, right?
Yes, that too.
So 4.01 is the Education Committee of the Whole, a presentation from Mrs. Smith.
Good evening, everyone. Excited to present this evening. We do have quite a few topics for you, but before I get into that, we always like to start Education Committee with some reminder of our students, and thanks to Mrs. Folks, all of our board members this evening should have received a bookmark. We have Summer Library. The theme this year was Adventure Awaits, and we had a student contest where students could submit to create a bookmark, and then many of them were turned into printed, and they were shared at Summer Library. So we wanted you to have a copy of that. Summer Library's been going well. We do have some final dates just to get out there in the public. August 16th at East and August 17th at Evergreen are our last two final Summer Libraries, and they are from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Oh, sure. Okay. So just a reminder of the purpose of Committee of the Whole, and I know this has been talked about a little bit, but we are going to share topics in Education Committee and then obviously in Finance Committee related to the board agenda with all of our school board members. We will provide an opportunity after each item for the board members to have comment or conversation, provide feedback, ask any questions and cultivate some conversation. And then I will turn and see if any of our public members would like to comment, and we do have a microphone that I will go around to them if they would like to share anything. And then, as I mentioned, logistics, and maybe can do away with some of this as we move on, but I tried to be very scripted this evening to remind myself to stop after each one, so you'll see a slide just prompting us to have the board and public comment there as well. And public will be asked, since the meeting is being recorded, to again state their name and municipality like they do in a board meeting. So these are the topics on our agenda this evening. There are many of them. I won't read through them for you, but you can see many of them are aligned to the board agenda, and I will reference the actual agenda items as we move through as well. I don't think I can click Dr. Russell with that open. No, that's okay. All right. So first up is the comprehensive plan. This is action item 4.03 on the agenda. This was actually presented to the board in somewhat of a draft format back in our last board meeting in June. And then in July, we finalized everything, and we did send that out to our board members as well as to our community through a community message, and it is posted on our website for review. It is required to be available for 30 days for public review before approval by the board, and then submission to PDE by the end of August. So we are recommending continuing with our mission statement, which was developed several years ago, and again focusing on the 3 focus areas that you saw Dr. Russell again mention in her report. We have, however, identified 4 goal areas based upon our annual data presentation and the review of some of that data in terms of math proficiency, English language learner proficiency, special education proficiency, and continuing a focus on student wellness. So we'll maintain the 3 focus areas and then specifically hone in on those particular areas where we're looking for student proficiency or just the mental health, physical, social, emotional wellness. There are also 5 required state reports that you can see listed here from Gifted Education, Student Services, Induction, PD Plan, and those are all also were made public as well for any comment or feedback. So I will pause here then. Again, this is action item 4.03 on the comprehensive plan and those 5 state required reports. Are there any comments from our board members on this particular item? I see none. Any public have comment on the comprehensive plan draft? All right, thank you, gentlemen. So the second item is curriculum guides. This aligns with action item 4.04. This was again brought forth to the board in our June education updates. And these, again, sit for 30 days. Since this is our next board meeting, we would be seeking board approval for this particular course, which is Nova Lab. This is really around that design thinking course. This is a course that Mr. Gary Height has ran at the high school for quite some time, and we have updated the scope and sequence and the learning outcomes for our students. Again, it's action item 4.04. Any questions or comments from board members? Public? All right, the third section is grants, and this is several action items associated with this 4.05, 6, 7, as well as 5.17. These are our federal programs, so I'll start out with our Title programs. Title I is a program in which our schools qualify based upon the number of students that are economically disadvantaged, and if the percentage at the school is higher than the district percentage, those schools then qualify for these funds to be dispersed to the schools. So here at Perkiomen Valley, we have 3 schools that have historically qualified: Schwenksville South and PV West. Evergreen is getting slightly closer to that each time, closer to our district average, but has not yet reached that. This year we are receiving $251,000 and some change there. That's pretty average for the past several years, although last year was a much higher allocation, but then we get a yearly adjustment and they adjusted us back down to around this number. So this is pretty typical for us. We are required then to allocate the funds to the schools based upon the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged. So that's why you'll notice Schwenksville has a higher allocation of that allotment, as does then West is next and then South. And so it is a formula from the government in which we calculate that. We also are required to provide funds to any non-public students that are PV students and live and reside here in Perkiomen Valley, but their parents may choose to send them to a non-public. Does not matter if that non-public is within our district boundaries or not. So we do have to do what's called meaningful consultation with the non-public schools. We collect from them how many students do they have that are PV students, how many are economically disadvantaged, and then if those students would have attended West, South, or Schwenksville, then we have to allocate a per pupil allocation to them. We contract with our intermediate unit, which means we send these funds to our intermediate unit, who then provides the services directly to the non-pub. So for example, a reading specialist or an interventionist that they may hire that works with these non-publics then to provide those services to these students. So you can see the breakout really is about $6,700 will be going to those non-publics. We have 10 students this year, which is a little bit higher than normal. We're working with 5 non-pubs. Typically it's around 2 or 3. The bulk of these funds are spent on salaries and benefits. So the 3 principals look at their budget. They figure out how many staff can they work within their budget that we could hire to support interventions for the students and additional services for students who qualify for Title I services. So the school qualifies based upon free and reduced or economically disadvantaged. The students within that school then qualify based upon academic need. And so you can see the bulk is $235,000. That actually will support 12 people. Many of them are part-time, and it looks like we are looking for about 2 full-time people out of there as well. But the principals really look at their schedule, and then they recommend how they would like to allocate those funds. About $9,000 is left for some resource materials that we may purchase in those buildings, and we are required to set aside $500 for any homeless students within these 3 schools who may need services as well. So that's how that's broken out. Moving on to Title II then. Title II is really about mainly professional development and how do we provide supports to our teachers to improve student achievement and growth. Again, we are required to do a non-public share as well. This, however, is based upon the non-public schools that are within the boundaries of Perkiomen Valley School District, and we work with 2 of them. And again, it's per pupil allocation, their total students and ours. So you can see about $10,000 will go to the non-public schools. A large bulk, around $30,000, supports our Linkit Navigator. Linkit is our data warehouse, which we purchase through our software budget, and the analytics side of it. A lot of those slides you saw in the annual data presentation and that data crunching that they do, the customizing of things, that comes out of Title II. And then the remaining, slightly less than $50,000, will be allocated for professional development or consultants. At this point in time, we are working with Dr. Jenna Rufo to provide a keynote on opening day. You can see that allocation. And you previously, in June, approved an agreement with Professional Learning Partnership for about $7,800 as well. The remainder of that will be used for different professional development aligned to our comprehensive plan. Title III then is really to support our English language learners, or our ELs, and this allocation, $11,000, is actually much higher than we usually get. We're usually getting around $2,000 to $3,000, so this is an area that is receiving additional federal funds. We do, in this particular area, contract Title III services through the intermediate unit again as well for all of these services. So this is broken out. If you recall, you previously approved a program audit of ELL for next year, so a portion of that will be funded through this. We have some software, curriculum resources, or field trips that we have allocated money, and then some additional funds. We will be working with the intermediate unit and their program specialist on some ELD professional development for ELD teachers, but also for all staff as well. And then Title IV, the final federal program here, is around $20,000. That's pretty average with our typical allocation. This allocation is intended to be for well-rounded education, safety, technology, digital literacy. So anything that you allocate in here needs to align to one of those 4 particular areas. It's very similar to Title II, just with a different specialty or area of focus. So again, we have non-public. We always allocate money to our MLK Day of Service to provide the resources for that. And the remaining, we've put into 2 categories. We are re-looking at our health and wellness resources in 6 to 12 and looking at that curriculum. So we're anticipating possibility needing resources there. And then as well as we've talked about many safety resources and upgrades that we would be able to use some of these funds for as well. So then there's Ready to Learn, and this is a grant as well. We have received this allocation, I think, as long as I can remember, that I have been here, slightly over $500,000. This is a block grant that is distributed to Pennsylvania schools, and this is the main funds for any curricular resources. So in June, you approved quite a few curriculum resources for the courses that I have listed on the screen, and they are funded out of this particular grant. It averages around $400,000 for this coming year. The remaining 106, if you recall, when Mr. Ganesh and I presented our phased plan for the interactive panels, this would be the next chunk of the interactive panels. When we're ready to order them, we would bring that forth as well. And then I wanted to provide you an update on ESSER 3. So lots of monies that we are talking about here. We specifically wanted to show you where we are at with that allocation that we called social and emotional, or $664,000. The total amount has not changed, but as we've moved through the time since we received the funds, we've been providing you with updates. So we do have the bulk of that amount is coming into staffing. We have the one additional counselor that the board approved a year or so ago. There are funds still there for the health and wellness supervisor position that we continue to attempt to fill. And then last year, if you recall, the end of the year, we had an agreement with MCIU for some counselor services for around $12,000, and that was budgeted in ESSER as well. We purchased the fitness center, which was slightly less than $50,000, and then you can see some of the other things that we either have already expended or we've budgeted. For example, restorative practices hasn't been spent yet, but we've budgeted it for the training that's needed for our high school. That leaves a slightly over $100,000 here, and we wanted to share with you this evening how we were looking to spend that. So Dr. Russell has put together another recommendation to continue those services for the counselor services through MCIU. That is action item 5.17, and that comes in right around $50,000, and so that is a portion of the remaining 100 that we would like to recommend. And then if you recall our conversations when the fitness center equipment was purchased, we talked about how could we comparably support the arts departments and the mental health and wellness that we know improves when students are involved in those departments. And we've been working with the department chairs and meeting with their departments, and we have come together with the recommendations that are here for around $50,000, mainly with an artist in residence who's somebody who would come to the district. She works in national parks and she looks at the beauty of the park, and she actually composes music, and she would work with our students in that through the arts department and through our music program, and then actually come here and have an assembly and work with our students. And then we have some replacement instruments that the elementary is asking for. And then the art department really looked at K-12 and wanted to move more in forms of digital art. And so you can see some of the things that they are looking for, and then some other miscellaneous items like the pottery and clay equipment. So that would total around the $50,000 there as well. So this was several agenda items. 4.05 is your Title 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4.06 is that Ready to Learn grant. 4.07 is the ESSER 3 allocations, and then 5.17 is that mental health counselor service agreement for that $50,000 that we would be extending from last year is item 5.17. So any questions, comments from the board?
Mr. Dorr has a question. Mr. Dorr?
Ms. Smith, you've always crushed it on presentations. I have to say change is always tough for some people, but I loved how you incorporated the agenda items and even previously voted on agenda items into the presentation. So well done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorr. Dr. Campley, I saw your hand.
I just had a question, and I apologize if I'm getting myself confused with things. At some point there was discussion, maybe we voted and I'm just not remembering, on getting some stuff done with the auditorium. Is that just through different funding, or did that get squashed with these three?
I believe that is different funding, but I will certainly defer to Dr. Russell or Mr. Weaver.
Later on in the agenda.
That is actually on our Finance Committee of the whole agenda, and it would be through capital projects.
Okay, thank you. That's what happens when you go on vacation and you don't read ahead. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. Ms. White?
Question that I have is with regard to the Title I funding. So these are the allocations based on the funds that we receive. I'm just curious, for the homeless set-aside specifically, that's the minimum that we're required to, I'm assuming. But if we need additional funds based on homeless within the district, where does that money come from?
we can certainly, so when you submit these grants, you submit what do you think you're going to be spending it on. So should we need to increase that, we can. We always do a funding adjustment that comes out later in the year where I actually report more, what did we accurately spend it on. And I certainly work very closely with Mrs. Hurd. Should we have a student in this situation, would the funds come from here or from other budgets, or do we increase this?
And that's district-wide, correct?
Yes.
So I guess my question really is how those funds are accessed by individuals in need.
So I think that typically comes through if a student is identified as homeless. Let's say there was a fire in their home and they are temporarily homeless. And we are aware of that and they are receiving Title I services. That's something that we can, when maybe we're transporting them or a resource that they particularly need, then we would work with Mrs. Hurd to allocate those funds towards that. I don't know, Mrs. Hurd, though, or Mr. Weaver, if there's something beyond that should be added, or Dr. Russell.
The only thing that I will add, I think, to the question you were posing also, Ms. White, is that our social workers make the connection. So it's our families connecting to counselors and social workers that then gets us to the business department or Mrs. Smith to get those funds.
I guess my concern is that $500 is not very much money for a family or a theoretically siblings, for example, among buildings for things like transportation, food, clothing, supplies, technology. I mean, we provide a certain amount of that for everybody, but I guess my concern is that in light of the different climate that we're in right now, I'm just wondering if there should maybe be a separate assessment done for families of need.
So I would just remind us that when it's in the Title I, it would be for homeless for Title I services. So if for like food, some of those things that you mentioned would come out of different budgets that we have available to us. This would be specifically if they're in a Title I school and they have an academic need. So it gets a little bit tricky in terms of what we could actually use it for.
Thank you for clarifying. That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from the board? Any public comment? Okay. So section 4 that I have here is regarding our assessment schedule. You have seen a draft as we have developed it. This is action item 4.08 this evening. I have given you the final draft of the elementary assessment schedule, and I would like to point out that the last time that we showed it to you, it was a lot fuller. We had map assessments on here, a couple of other things, and we really talked with our administrative team about which assessments are giving us the best information and that are usable for our teachers to assess and work with our students. So we're really focusing on the Fontes and Pinnell and the Linkit benchmarks. And Linkit, again, is just the company that we use, but their benchmarks are very much aligned to the PSSA. They mirror what they look like when the students receive them, as well as they are standards-based and give us that grade level information. So you can see that there's a lot more empty space here than there has been in the past, and those will be the pieces we'll focus on. So we are eliminating then, or really reducing the map assessments. That was something we put in place several years ago. We value the information we get from that, and it is growth data. However, it's just not as teacher-friendly or user-friendly to be able to interpret into what do I do in my classroom. However, we would still be purchasing maybe about 25 licenses per building that they could allocate for maps. Should they have a student who they want some more information on, then we could do that separate assessment for those individual students if there's an identified need. But not all students would be assessed. In the secondary assessment schedule, you will see the addition of STAR. Since the board approved the STAR Reader and the STAR Math most recently, you will see that those assessments have been added to this calendar 3 times per year. And remember, those are about 20 minutes. They're done in the classroom, so we don't have to create a separate building schedule for these. They're pretty simple per se to administer to our students, but should give us some really valuable data. And we're looking forward to that as we move into the year. And you'll also notice our middle schools have always done the Linkit benchmark, or at least for the last couple of years. But you will notice that we are also moving into doing that in some of the areas in the high school. So really trying to, when we did the annual data presentation, we showed you the lack of interventions and universal screeners at the secondary, and I'm pleased to be able to say that we've really, with your support, been able to add both universal screeners and some intervention tools at the secondary school. So this again is 4.08 is the 22-23 assessment schedule. Questions, comments? Dr. Campley.
I just have a quick question. When we had MAP at elementary, same thing with Fontes and Pinnell and PSSEs, at some point the data is shared out with families. Would the same thing occur with Linkit and STAR, because at high school level, they never had that before, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, a good question. The STAR does come with parent reports, just like the MAP did, so we will continue to do that with STAR. Linkit at this point is kind of like your old Foresight assessment. It does not have a built-in parent assessment, but that doesn't mean that teachers wouldn't share with the, the parent if there's a need, or if there is, I really want to talk to you about how your student's performing on this, that we would have that data to share. It just doesn't have that built-in feature, but STAR does have parent reports, and we are planning to share them. Ms. White?
I think one of the things that I continue to have some concern about is what is happening with the data, not just for intervention, but also for identifying those that need enrichment. And I think that what is continually missed, I think MAPS was very good at detailing areas of excellence for individual students. But again, there's never any type of data share out that I've seen in a public way of whether or not those students are identified as, extraordinary is the word that I'm thinking of, but I mean in terms of an intervention tool. I understand how the data is used by the district, but I think the piece that's missing is, especially at the secondary level and the middle level specifically, as what you're doing with the data that shows exceptionality in certain results.
Mm-hmm. So what I can share is that the middle school and the high school are both really working on developing an MTSS process and framework, that multi-tiered systems of support that the elementaries have really been functioning in for quite a while. Dr. Sachs has been providing a lot of leadership in this particular area, and we're going to be implementing data team meetings, just like we have at the elementary. So after that Linkit benchmark or that STAR is given, we will be leading with our MTSS facilitators, our new staff, with Dr. Saxon, with building leadership, those meetings at middle school and high school, which will be new for them and something that we have to transition them into. But not only will we talk about students that need interventions, we do need to make sure that we focus on the students that also need to have enrichment. Again, the elementary's gotten good at that. When they make their groups for I&E period, there's always the group for the students who maybe need to be enriched or be pushed a little bit further. High school and middle school will need to ensure that when we have those conversations, we're talking about both ends of the spectrum and the middle, all of our students.
So then to follow up on that, when you're talking about what the work is being done on the faculty level, is that then trickling down to the teaming that's set up? And will that be communicated to parents individually in these instances?
Could you elaborate on what you mean by the teaming? Or you mean in terms of assignment of students to teams?
At the elementary school, I think it's, to your point about the I&E, they're pulled out to be leveled, right? But there's no leveling per se at the middle level. At the high school level, you could say that they're leveled based on the coursework that they are scheduled for. So regardless of the data that you're collecting with these exceptional students or the middle students, they're not being leveled and taught to their potential. And I think that's an ongoing concern, and that's a lot of the feedback that and the conversations that I've had is that there's not really anything for a student that we have data for. We're not meeting their needs.
What I would share in response to that is you're correct. Math is the only subject in the middle school at this point in time that, to use your word, leveled, and where we have some acceleration in the math area. Our middle schools have taken the approach of a heterogeneous approach. That's been the philosophy to the middle schools to this point. Certainly a conversation that could be had if, we are going to get our gifted task force off the ground this year, I promise, and that would be a great topic to have at that time. There are other middle schools that have a blend of homogeneous and heterogeneous, or there may be other classes. What I can tell you with our efforts to be more inclusive, our principals have been more careful in terms of the placement of students in terms of schedules, so that we don't give a teacher a breadth of their students in front of them, that we have our students that have the highest need with our students who have the greatest need for enrichment as well. So they are trying to be careful in terms of hand scheduling some of that to make sure that we're giving a realistic class to a teacher, that they are able to meet the needs of those varying groups of students in front of them, but not make it too wide of a discrepancy between the needs in the classroom. So I can tell you they've worked on that a little bit. We definitely have more work to do. Anybody else from the board? Public? Okay. Maybe I should just have you like call out if you want. All right. Flexible instruction options are number 5 here. This is going to get a little bit tricky, so I'll try to be clear. There's 2 things that we're going to talk about, but there's only one action item, and that is action item 4.09. So public schools in the state of Pennsylvania are required to have 180 school days, 900 hours at the elementary, 990 hours at the secondary, and we have to report that every year. Did we meet those requirements? With the onset of the pandemic, COVID-19, PDE allowed an option for districts called an emergency instructional time template that gave an exception to school code that allowed you to meet those requirements, not in a face-to-face in person, because that's how it used to be. It only counted if the students were in the school building and we were face-to-face. So they provided this exception to school code that you could apply for as a school district, and then if you had any virtual instruction days, you could count that time, that seat time, even though we weren't physically in school together, towards the requirements of the 180 days or the hours. That is something that the state did for the 21-22 school year, and they have announced that they are again allowing that exception for the 22-23 school year. I would like to make it really clear it is not our intention for Dr. Russell nor I for us to move into virtual instruction. However, we do feel that we should apply to the state and complete the formality of that in the event that something should happen that we would need to move into that direction. Again, it's not our desire to do that based upon our experiences, but this would allow us to be able to do that if the need should arise. It is still a local decision should you implement it. Applying does not mandate that we have to use it. So there is a document attached to that agenda item that is the state form that you need to fill out and submit to PDE. And it also requires that you include sample schedules of what would instruction look like should you enact this exception to school code. And so we are simply sharing with you very much synchronous schedules. We basically took their actual school day schedule and just mirrored it in what an online schedule would look like. Again, should we choose to move in this. So it is our recommendation that we apply, giving us the ability to implement that should the board and Dr. Russell recommend that at any time based upon the circumstances of the pandemic. This is very related to the pandemic, this piece of what I'll be speaking about this evening. So again, that's action item 4.09. It is called the Emergency Instructional Time Template. Board questions or comments, or Mr. Zubers, anything to clarify?
No, the majority of districts we represent are adopting this resolution just to preserve the flexibility.
Mr. Dorr also has a question. Mr. Dorr?
I had a question, but Mr. Subers kind of answered it for me. I was concerned that wouldn't the state dictate this versus the district?
No, this provides the district the opportunity and flexibility to use virtual instruction days in the event that they were needed. Doesn't require you to do anything. It just provides you in advance the flexibility to do so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Subers.
This is different, though, just to clarify, this is different than our flexible instruction days where if
I'm
it's a
getting to that.
snow, that's,
Yep.
this is COVID only.
Correct.
Correct, okay.
Anything else from the board on this? I see. You, Mr. Leggett? Okay. Can you turn this on? Just state your name and spelling.
Thank you. Is it on?
I think so.
Okay, thanks. Robert Liggett, Perkiomen Township. I guess as a corollary to this, if we don't apply for this pandemic relief, then would that then put us in the situation that if there was some need for the pandemic, that we would be locked into continuing in school, or what's the ramifications for
The
not
implication is that you're not going to meet your 180-day instructional day requirement, student day requirement, and could result in a loss of funding if we were otherwise not able to provide in-person instruction.
Extend it, yeah.
Pardon?
It's for 5 days, so that.
Oh,
you
no,
could-
no,
No,
you
this is
can't extend
different.
the 5 days. The 5 days is 5 days, and it's not COVID related.
Correct.
So, yeah. So you can extend your 5 days. Your 5 days are there,
They're going to be the FID that I'll talk about in a moment.
but if it's beyond 5 days, then we would lack this flexibility and potentially face a loss of funding.
Excellent. That's what I just wanted to bring forward. What would be the consequences of not doing this? So thank you.
Potentially loss of funding.
So it's really a safety net, so that if, God forbid, we're in the same situation we were in 2 years ago, we would continue to get our funding and have an alternate resource. But the hope is that we won't be there again. It's just there in case we need it.
Correct.
You know, and for instance, it's come also on the agenda, MCOPH is recommend, you know, and all PDE, everyone else is recommending that you maintain in-person instruction to the maximum extent possible.
Further comment or questions on this?
I just have to say that I don't think that we should be entertaining the option of closing school. I've brought it up before and people didn't quite understand what I was saying. And I'll just say it again a little slower. In the 1918 pandemic, the two largest school districts in the country remained open the entire time. And the superintendents were heroes in my book, in my education book. And they did that for the children, and the teachers did it for the children. And we've heard a lot about that. And I think that, and this is what I'm doing here, that if we allow teachers the option to push us to close the school, that they will push us to close the school for their own concerns, and everybody has their own concerns, which are valid for themselves. But some of us want to look out for the children and their education. And if we were in the position that we were in 2 years ago, we shouldn't have closed down then, and we shouldn't close down now. I, for the life of me, do not understand what y'all are doing without masks on. All right? Nothing has changed. COVID is still here. So if we allow, or if we elect to apply for time that's available so that teachers can stay at home and teach from home, and the kids can go back to learning from home, and all of the parents of those teachers then have to stay at home with them and not go to their jobs while the teachers get to keep their jobs and teach from home. I don't think that that's good for families in the district. I don't think that's good for children in the district. I actually don't think it's good for teachers in the district. And I don't think it's good for the school system or the future of America. So that's why I do not want to elect to shirk our duties as a school. So that's my position.
Thank you,
Let
Mr.
me just
Keenan.
remind you that as other school districts around us closed because it was hot or windy or drizzled, EV did not. And so that gives me comfort knowing that as other school districts around us shirked and used the ability to go virtual because it might rain or it might be windy or it might get hot out, Perkiomen Valley School District remained open. And that gives me a lot of great comfort. I understand your thought process. Trust me, I understand 100%, but I also have comfort in the fact that our leaders aren't that concerned about wind and rain. And they're concerned about keeping kids in school because that's where it's most important.
Thank you, Mr. Saylor. Again, I'll just reiterate, Dr. Russell and I absolutely believe having our students in schools where we want them to be as well. This is just, it gives us the flexibility should something unforeseen happen so that we could meet those requirements by school code. So again, that's action item 4.09. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. The reason I wanted to follow up is being that this is especially one of the first of our committees of the whole, and typically we have a back and forth between the public and the people that are in the committee. And at this point, in following the informal rules that President Saylor had before, we talked about we had long conversations about the informal voting that happens in committees. Considering this is a committee meeting and we seem to have at least an opposition viewpoint at this point, in order to get a sense of what the committee is doing, do we want to hold that informal vote that we were talking about, specifically on this issue, because Mr. Keenan does seem to have an issue with this.
The whole board will be voting soon. It's one of the motions.
I understand, but in committee, right now, this motion would be passed on at best to next week. This is a committee meeting, and committee meetings, we have informal votes per the previous directives. So this being a committee of the whole, typically the chairmanship would pass to somebody. I don't know if you're retaining the chairmanship during the committee meeting, but I would just like to get a sense of the board and the committee where they stand on this.
We only did that in finance and policy. That was never done in education, and that was mainly because it wasn't a committee of the whole. It was just four people. We're an entire committee, and the entire committee will vote in like 20 minutes. Dr. Campley.
I'm just wondering, just kind of piggyback that in a situation like this, when there's something out, we're voting now, but in the future, if the vote is going to be taking next week, if it gives the public a sense of where we all stand ahead of time, and then when they're emailing us and they're reaching out, they have a feel of where we're going so they can give some influence. Am I understanding you correctly, so that we can get some feedback between now and when the vote actually happens, you know, to hopefully if right in this moment we're not going to say the way you want, Mr. Liggett, that you now have the opportunity to know which people in the group you want to really focus on reaching out with facts and information in the hopes of swaying us more towards your side and what you feel is best for the community. Am I understanding you correctly?
Essentially, but also just to know where the committee is standing. Because in a typical committee, we would say, you know, what is the view of the committee? This is now a committee of 9, so I don't see how that procedure would be changing at this point, especially considering the shortness of time now between the committee and the action.
Well, I have no problem telling you that I never felt for a day or a second that teachers were trying to shirk their responsibilities. None of them wanted to be at home. None of them wanted to be in the middle of a pandemic. They all wanted to be in their classrooms, and I support this 100%.
Thank you, but please, I'm not trying to take over the proceedings here either. It should be the chair of the committee that would be addressing if you wanted to take an informal vote. Thank you.
I could just add to that, and then certainly I will defer to you, Mr. Saylor. At the end of all of the presentation, I will make a recommendation for the action items that I have spoken about to be added to the consent agenda. And at that point in time, any board member could express, well, I would like this particular action item not to be on consent, which would then lead to the actual vote next week, and any further comments. So I don't know, Mr. Saylor or Dr. Russell, if you wanted to add anything to that.
I was going to say exactly that there is an opportunity for board members to speak up. We've front-loaded the agenda with the items that administration is recommending the board move forward with action. And we've recommended that they end up on consent, believing that we've informed the board and afforded that opportunity to have conversation. As you mentioned, any board member can request to pull something from consent. It will still sit and be available for a week for our public and afford them the opportunity to reach out to Mrs. Smith or I, or Mr. Weaver in the case of finance. So it might be helpful to see how this flow goes, getting through it one time, and then maybe we can reflect and consider again.
Okay. Ms. White?
And I just to, I don't know if, I guess we can talk about it openly now, right? Okay, it's weird to, okay. So I think that maybe some of it is perception as to the role of an informal vote or consensus at committee, because regardless of what happened and what discussions happened at committee, whatever the consensus was, it still does come down to an administrator making a recommendation to the board as a whole for a vote. So just because there was a consensus made about something at Education Committee, for example, that's information and intel that Lori, that Mrs. Smith took and processed, and then ultimately formulated a decision and recommendation on her own for presentation for the board for a vote. So it wasn't the committee making the decision. It's giving information to our administration to make informed decisions on behalf of the community and the school district. Am I incorrect in that? So that's a perception thing, that the committee is having a vote of some sort. Not that there's no voice, just that the ultimate recommendation comes from administration.
Thank you, Ms. White. Okay. So I'll move on then to what's called a flexible instruction day, not to confuse it with what we just talked about. This is what we refer to as a FID. We love acronyms. This was actually implemented pre-pandemic, so has nothing to do with COVID or the pandemic. It was implemented, I think, at least a year before. And this allowed a district to implement a different type of delivery model, a virtual delivery model, for many of the reasons that you see listed there in the second bullet. Most schools interpreted this as another way to have a snow day and really not to lose instruction or to add days into June, because we all know that if we poll everybody wants to get out of school as early as possible in June. And so that's why many school districts utilize this day. And we did not apply pre-pandemic because we were not one-to-one and we didn't have a system in place to be able to deliver instruction on a snow day. But now, through the pandemic, we are one-to-one. We have this ability to do that. And so we did have a presentation to our school board. We had lots of committee meetings, lots of input from different stakeholders, and we've worked with our union leadership quite a bit. And the school board did approve in the summer of 2021 for us to, again, you have to apply to the state for this. So we did apply, and PDE approved that in the summer of 2021. It is already approved for the 3-year period of 21-22 through the 23-24 school year through PDE. So we're not seeking any board action this evening. We just wanted to inform you of what we've come to agreement with our union leadership and through that stakeholder input. Again, it gives you the opportunity to meet the 180-day instructional requirement without being physically present in the school. It can be synchronous, asynchronous, a combination of both, and it may not exceed 5 days per school year. So these were some of the options that we considered following our typical school day, kind of like what I presented to you in the previous scenario, fully asynchronous, a combination of both of them, and, you know, again, utilizing snow days when schools are closed only was definitely something that through our groups we wanted to talk about instead of increasing the length of the school year. So what we have come up together, again, with all the input that we have, is that there is consensus that we don't want to just rush to using one of these days. If we have a weather day, we have 3 days already built into our instructional calendar. That's been pretty historically done here. We would continue to use those 3 days as they are built into the calendar. If, however, we should get to the point where we have a 4th day, or let's say we have a blizzard that closes school for several days, this is an option for Dr. Russell, with conferring with the board, to consider as something that maybe we would implement. And we wanted a plan in place should we need to implement that or decide to do that. So we have come up with a combination of an asynchronous and a synchronous. We really basically are mirroring our half-day schedule. So if you think about those 4 half-days that we have built into the school year, students would have asynchronous classes for their morning time up until when that dismissal time would have been, and then they would have some asynchronous work for their afternoon time. It allows a level of flexibility on those inclement weather days that some of our families and our students need, but also provides the level of instruction that we would like to. We have developed expectations for students, for teachers, and for parents. We've talked about what does attendance versus participation look like, and we intend to include this in our back-to-school information with our families so that they are prepared come the weather season, and we'll reinforce this there, that if we should do this, this is what it would look like, and so that everybody is prepared for that. So again, it was approved in summer of 2021 that we're allowed to use them. Again, it's not our desire to use, many of these days. It is just there should we want to use it after we've implemented the 3 days. And depending on the circumstances, I mean, if it's a blizzard, nobody's going to have internet. We're not going to do one of these days. It'll just be a school closed snow day. But again, any questions or comments on the flexible instruction days, or FID? Public? Okay. I think I need to click on it again. I can't accept. Okay. No, that's okay. So this section 6 is we wanted to publicly present the assessment results that we have received from the 2022 PSSA and Keystone results that we have received. This aligns with action item 4.10 because that is going to be a curricular resource. I'm going to talk to you as a way that we would like to address some of the assessment scores that we see. Before I show the scores, I just wanted to give you a quick recap. The PSSA is administered in grade 3 through 8 in English, language arts, and math, and the PSSA science in grades 4 and 8. Keystone exams are like final exams, end of course assessments created by the state in Algebra 1, English Language Arts, for which we align to our English 10, and biology. And I'm going to show you the last 4 years, actually 5 years, but we are missing one piece of data from the 2020 year because there were no state assessments at the onset of COVID. And I just wanted to show you again what those instructional modes looked like. Normal is kind of what I'm just couching pre-pandemic to have looked like. 2021 was that combination of both virtual and in person, and then 2022 was our closest back to normal instruction that we have had since the pandemic. So I show you the last 3 years. I'm giving you a district summary. So really, broad look at our proficient and advanced students, their achievement in each of the grade levels. So not broken out by building or any programs or subgroups, just simply straight proficient and advanced percentages. And you can see each grade moving across there. I've tried to give you a little visual on the right then. The green arrow moving up, of course, means that we've seen an increase in that percentage, and the red arrow that we have seen a decrease. And for most of the slides that I'm going to show you, you will see green arrows, which we're pleased to see. You definitely see a varying degree, though, of how much we were able to improve in that particular area or not. And you're going to see, I believe, 2 of the red arrows. So this is our English Language Arts for our elementary students in grades 3 to 5. And then moving into 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, still in English Language Arts. We've seen improvement in all of the grades here in this particular area. And then shifting to our math in grades 3 through 8, again, you can see that we've had some increases and, really holding more steady there in 5th grade. And then moving into our middle schools, you can again see increases in all of the areas in our middle school. I do just want to point out that the algebra students are taking that keystone. They take it whenever they finish the algebra course. So these are students that in the middle school are taking the algebra course. They are in an advanced track of mathematics. The general track would be that students would take Math 6, Math 7, Math 8. And then here's our science for grades 4 and grade 8. And then looking at our high school, again, these are keystone exams, algebra, literature, and biology. Again, you can see we've had some growth in literature and biology, and we are, certainly looking at that algebra score much more carefully and wondering, why we saw such a decrease there. So really, that is a very cursory look here from the top per se. What's next? So we really need to now look at that by grade level, by building, by our subgroups, by subjects, by the reporting categories, and all the way down to the standards, and then by the individual students. So that now is the work that will happen in our buildings, in their data team meetings, even at our leadership team meetings. We begin to look at that and have our principals and their teams really vet out what is the cause, or where are the areas of need that we have, where are the areas that we are excelling. We then consider what implications that has to curriculum topics or scope and sequence. Is it something that we need to shift around, or is it something we need to put more emphasis on? We also look, are there other curricular resources, and I'll talk about one in a moment, which aligns to item 4.110. But we look at those resources, whether that's for Tier 1 for all students, or that's an intervention resource, or an intervention structure. For example, I mentioned before, we have a structure in the elementary. We're working on what that structure can look like in the secondary. And we really want to focus on effective instructional practices. We talk a lot about program, but we also need to invest in our people. And so, balancing that out, the investment in our staff and in the professional development for them and supporting them and what resources they have versus the programs and curricular things that we can buy. And it's a combination of both. And then we'll begin to develop action plans and in those areas of identified need, and they are aligned with the comprehensive plan. So you noticed one of the goals in the comprehensive plan was math proficiency. You can see that that aligns to how our scores came back this year as well. So one of the resources that we would like to present to you, this was presented at the June 2nd Education Committee meeting, but we were not prepared with the quote and so forth to bring it to you in June with the other resources that we presented for approval, so we are bringing it at this time. And this is a program called Desmos. It is to support high school Algebra 1. It is a supplement to our existing curriculum and resources that we have. It's very much focused on problem-based. It is interactive digitally, as well as there are hard copy printables that you can print out. It very much goes from a conceptual basis or understanding of the concepts. It is meant to be interactive and real-time, where the student can be answering, the teacher can see it on their end and can provide them with real-time feedback. It is formative in nature. and has multiple points of access, meaning that all of us in the classroom don't have to be working on the same thing at the same time. You know, maybe I need to start at a particular level in a particular skill, and somebody else may be ready to jump in at a higher point in that or apply that before I'm ready to. And it really focuses on students being able to understand mathematical reasoning and discourse, having conversations, mathematical conversations in the classroom. So this is a resource that we are bringing forward for the algebra class at the high school. You can see it includes student and teacher licenses, as well as what's called a Desmos coach, which is a support for teachers in how they are working with students on the content. And another just, feature of this is there is a calculator component, and this is the only resource that we are aware of that has it's PDE approved that they could use that calculator component on their Keystone assessments as well. So this aligns to action item 4.10. It is $6,400, and we have budgeted that in Ready to Learn. So any comments, questions on anything with the assessment scores or that particular curriculum resource? Ms. Evans-Brockett?
Just when do students get informed of their Keystone scores?
Yeah, so the state just released the PSSA parent letters. We're going to talk about that at our next administrative meeting. The Keystone parent letters have not been released yet. So they do come from PDE through the state, and we wait for them to be released. They release them to us digitally. We can print all of them, or you can wait an extra month and they mail them all to you. So we are just getting those PSSA parent letters ready, and we'll talk at our August 9th admin meeting, and then as soon as the Keystone ones are available. So most likely shortly when they return to school, those will be available. Good question. Mr. Fountain?
Could you scroll back to the charts where these charts right here? We're looking at the arrows on the side, and the arrows seem to be positive when they're facing up. But if you look at 2018, even 2019 to 2022, none of them went up. They all had dramatic decreases, some of them more dramatic than others. Is it reasonable to say that we're going up, or are we still in a situation where we're really behind the 8 ball?
This is interesting. So Keystone exams, you can't necessarily look at a cohort. Like I see you're trying to compare from year to year the group of kids maybe as they move through. It's not necessarily a cohort because they take it whenever they took the particular course. So this is comparing different students to different students. So all we can really do is look across to see the general group of students, how are they performing, how many are proficient and advanced. When you look back at like middle school math, you can now look at a cohort. You can look at in 2018, grade 6 was 57%. That same group of students as 7th graders in 2019 were 59%. Now they did not test when they were 8th graders, so we can't see what they would have been. And now we can assume maybe some of them are the algebra scores in 2022. Some of them are probably not. Actually, they're not because those were middle school students still testing. So we do look at that, and we look to see, is a cohort of kids improving or moving as well? And the other important piece is growth data. So this is just one side, achievement. We really do look at the PVSD data then, because it's not just were they proficient or advanced, but are they growing from where they started from? Ms. White?
So these are all district numbers. Did you receive and did you assess our district against other districts as associated with this particular testing group? So, for example, if kids took 2 years off taking a test and now this is their first year back and they don't have a familiarity with the particular test model or mode, for example, that would be either a countywide or a statewide issue. It's not a PV issue per se. So my concern about these particular data points is that they're skewed in a negative way when the application of the test itself statewide was not well received.
We do not have other school district scores yet. So the state does release those, but it takes several months until those are released. So hopefully by the time that we do our annual data presentation, we'll have those and be able to compare at least to the state averages, or when we get the huge spreadsheet, we usually do crunch that to figure out the county schools and how we compare there.
But my understanding, so that would be for 2022, but my understanding, if I'm correct from when we did our data presentation, and we talked about this before, 2021, we still were one of the upper tier schools. Even though our numbers had dropped, we still maintained where we were amongst the pack of schools in the area.
I believe if I recall, and we could certainly provide an update in the memo, we were above the state average in I believe in every area, and within the county, you're right, we were, in the average or above average and across the county, but we can pull that back up as a refresher.
I just think it's good perspective what Ms. White brings up, because these scores look dire. And not that we don't want to focus on it, but it can't be our only source of information. We have to consider it within the context of the situation and in the context of what our state performed as a whole, to show that it wasn't like we went to 33% and every other school was at 90%.
We are certainly happy to see that there was growth in the majority of our areas. We would like to see more growth in all of them and more individual student growth as well. It's now that drilling down and recognizing we aren't going to recoup completely from the pandemic in 1 year either. And there are multiple factors. So we're trying to figure out what are those things that we can do that will have the most impact on increasing student achievement and growth. Mr. Keenan?
And find it interesting that we passed the synchronous and asynchronous learning, and to anybody with common sense, they look at this and they say, all right, synchronous and asynchronous learning are the primary cause of the learning deficits that you see up there. So if you want to know how to prevent this, it's not do synchronous and asynchronous learning.
Thank you. Anybody else from the board? Public comment?
Is there a way to aggregate the data by that?
Aggregated by which students were virtual and so forth. We have talked about that. We have a little bit more data digging to do. We certainly recorded which students were in the instructional modes at different times throughout the year. However, that was, I don't know what term you use, Mr. Ganesh, it was a flexible field in that you could change it each day. And so I can't pull out of Synergy to say on the date of testing, Laurie Smith was virtual on that day. So we need to go back to what our principals had in their records to figure out who at that time of testing was virtual. But you're right, that is a group that we could break it out by, and I have tried to work with Lincoln on that. Ms. White?
The other piece of data I think that is missing and I think is valuable is how many kids actually opted out of testing pre-pandemic and post-pandemic.
And we do, I believe we provided that before. We'd have to look back as well, Dr. Russell. We were able to break out our data based upon the students that opted out in the 2021 school year and be able to predict if those students had taken the test, what might we have anticipated that we would have seen in our achievement data. We did not do that for 2022. I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but I can tell you the number of students that opted out was significantly less than the previous year in 2021. But we can get that. Dr. Weston?
Thanks. Wade Weston, Collegeville Borough for the record. There's so much discussion you can have around these score data, so much to unpack, so many ways to delve into it, so many questions that they raise. We could spend multiple nights going into that, and I don't want to do that right now. I just want to make an observation. And it seems to me it's been a pretty consistent observation for the time that I was on the board, and it looks, even continuing through now. A distinct drop in performance between what you see in the elementary schools and what you see in testing taken at the middle school level. If you take 3, 4, 5 as a kind of a baseline, and then you look at 6, 7, 8, there's always a drop, and it's a pretty consistent drop too. If you look at the science scores, if I'm reading this right, you can actually follow a cohort here. The kids who are in grade 4 in 2018 should be the same kids that are in grade 8 in 2022, because we're missing the 2020 block there. In science, it was 94% in 2018. In 2022, it's 74%. And I'm not going to say that's because of asynchronous versus synchronous instruction. It's not because of the pandemic, because I feel like this has been a consistent finding for a very long time. These data are trying to tell us something, and I don't know if we're listening. I don't know if we are taking these data and asking the right questions to follow up on it. Because like I say, this has been going on for a long time, and we need to figure out why. I mean, I don't think kids get dumber between grade 4 and grade 8. You know, I think there's got to be something going on that we don't understand or that we haven't, you know, interrogated yet, that we need to start looking at these a little bit differently to figure out why.
Mr. Weston, I think that's a great point, because we know that in middle school, the buy-in and the effort that goes into some of these tests drastically changes as far as they don't see the benefit of why they're taking the PSSAs. Elementary school, you can convince them, talk it up. But middle school, you hear a lot of kids like, why, this doesn't affect my report card, it doesn't affect my grades. And I think we do see that consistently in any type of standardized testing when you get to the middle school ages, until you get to keystones where they know they need to pass them.
Thank you. Good observations, Dr. Weston, and one that we have noticed as well, and is a trend not only here, but across the state. And good questions for us to figure out. Okay. So I will move into enrollment and staffing, just a little bit of an update of where we're at here to start the school year, and it aligns to items 7.03, 7.04, and 7.06. You'll also see the enrollment report, obviously, under Section 4. These are our elementary enrollments. We have made a couple of staffing shifts as we have responded to where our students are and in which grades. You will notice that we, over on the far right under South, and I know that's hard to see, we have recommended to the board, and you'll see that for action tonight. We had only 3 sections of kindergarten planned at South, and due to increased enrollments in kindergarten, we were exceeding the class size. And so we have increased by an additional 0.5 kindergarten position to make a whole person in South, so that we can run 4 sections of kindergarten and have comparable class sizes to the other buildings here. So you will notice in the action items this evening, you will see the elimination of a 0.5 kindergarten position and then the creation of a 1.0 kindergarten position. In reality, we are adding a half, but those are the action items to move forward. And we do have the staff member who was in that half-time position is willing to assume the full-time position, and so you'll notice that under then the appointments, you will see her name represented there. We've had some other shifts. For example, Schwenksville, we shifted around, I believe it was 3rd grade to 1st grade to balance out some of the class sizes. And you'll notice we did do similar moving at Evergreen to help the 1st grade, which was exceeding some of our class sizes. And we really wanted to focus on the K1 and 2 and ensure that we could have lower class sizes there. I circled the 3rd grade there because, as you can see, they are slightly over what our guidelines are. I would just remind they are guidelines, but we have identified that as an area, and we are hoping to assign a full-time paraprofessional to be able to support in that classroom as well, because the numbers are a little bit higher. But again, we wanted to really focus on our K1 and 2 numbers in this particular elementary setting. Our middle school enrollments then I think we've been saying this to you for months. We're looking at that 6th grade number. We continue to do that. We're working with Dr. Clune. You see I circled the 26.6. He's getting right up to what that class size guideline is. I know that it looks different from the numbers there at West that you see. West, again, is a Title I school, and we always do look at making sure that we are providing additional supports and possibly lower class sizes there. But we also want equitable opportunities for our students in terms of class size. I did work with Dr. Clune. I looked at all of his class sizes and his core subjects. I can share this evening that we have 3 sections of ELA and 3 sections of social studies that are currently sitting at 26. I did not see anything greater than the 26. We have been brainstorming with our elementary principals, with our middle school principals. If we should decide in the next week that maybe we want to increase that to 9, how might we be able to do that with the resources that we currently have in district? So we're going to keep a close eye on that. We also do know that the current 4th grade class, or that would be coming into 6th grade, the now 5th grade, that would be 6th graders the following year, is much less. So we know we will need only 8 sections in the 23-24 year. So really looking at it from multiple lenses and trying to figure out what might be best here. And you can see the 8th grade numbers, we're still using those shared staff, which do reduce those class sizes quite a bit. Go ahead, Ms. Stephan Brockett.
I was looking at these earlier and noticing that the grade 7 class sizes at West are very small. And I know they like to have their teams of 4, but you could move a teacher from there and still have lower class sizes at West in 7th grade than you do at East in 7th and get that equity, because 26 sixth graders is too much. That's not acceptable. So we have to add a teacher there.
I don't disagree that we're watching it very carefully. What I will point out about teaming, and I'm past middle school principal, so I completely support teaming. I do recognize these are very small numbers for a team. What you have to be careful of in 7th and 8th grade, you can only make a 3-person team if they have multiple certifications, because you're now considered a secondary teacher with a particular cert. So it's elementary is easier, 6th grade is easier. I can teach 3-4 different subjects, but once I get to that 7th and 8th grade, and some of our staff are secondary certified, so they couldn't be on a 3-person team. So sometimes that ties our hands in that even if we wanted to make a 3-person team, we couldn't because of certs. But certainly something that we can look at. We did actually talk to Mr. Creedon last year when that group was in 6th grade about that. That could possibly be a possibility at that time. We know we need to keep looking at these numbers and how do we balance between East and West and make, the incoming students, how do we look at those groups of kids to balance them out?
I will just say again, I am not okay with the 26 at 6th grade. I feel very strongly about that. That is the beginning of a very difficult experience. And having 2 kids that went through middle school, I think that makes a big difference in how they perceive education for the rest of their life. And if these kids are in that large of classes, it's not a good start for them in middle school. So I strongly would like administration to figure that out and get us smaller class sizes there.
Thank you. Dr. Campley?
So is there any way to move ahead? Like, because even the Evergreen 3rd grade group is much higher than both Skipback and South. So, and then you have, grade 6 being at 26, which I agree 100% with Miss Evans-Brockett. Is there a way to go ahead and approve or put a motion on to get, a couple extra teachers to help with this?
So we have been of the thought that we would try to find that from within. What we've been struggling with is when we pull from within, that means we're impacting program elsewhere. So we've looked at some different configurations, been working with K-8 principals. Is there anywhere that we can have additional support? Because, it's really the last thing that we want to do is to ask for an additional staff member because it's not budgeted for. It would need to be pulled out of fund balance or somewhere else Mr. Weaver finds those funds. Certainly, should somebody tonight want to make a motion to add an additional teacher, you certainly could do that. I will defer to you, Dr. Russell, though, if you want to add anything.
I think we need to continue to have our conversations in advance of Monday before administration is in a position to make a recommendation to the board to add a teacher. I think we have to exhaust a few more things, have some additional conversations first, and follow up with our board this week. It is on the radar, blinking bright red. We are very concerned about it.
Ms. White?
So unpopularly, which I love, I'm wondering if because the enrollments are uneven, there are some elementary schools that are split between East and West, and I'm wondering if that would maybe fix the issue, if maybe all of the elementary cohort that gets split stays together.
Dr. Russell and I actually had this conversation the past week or two that is something possibly to think about as we move into 23, 24. It's that nasty word that sometimes causes a lot of, angst as families are used to going to a particular school, but it is something that we thought we could use this next year to think about because it does appear that West is getting lower and East is hanging out around the same, although I will say they'll be down to about 180, 190 in 23, 24 into 6th grade, but something we have certainly thought about.
And then the follow-up to that would be the additional housing developments that are going in. I think that there needs to be some very specific thought about where those particular communities are bused for middle school and elementary school, et cetera.
Yeah, good points. So we will do some additional investigating and share an update in the memo this week about 6th grade and make a recommendation before next week. Mr. Keenan?
I do agree that if you cannot move the teachers, you have to move some students.
Thank you. I would just like to, and I think even our staff would agree with me, I'd really like to say thank you to our board for really having guidelines as well as adhering to them and wanting to have smaller class sizes. That is not my experience in my past districts. Those numbers would have been acceptable. So I really appreciate that you expressed that. Thank you. High school, we don't break out for you the same way because it's really based upon course requests and so forth, and they are still finalizing their schedule, but these are our numbers, and they've looked pretty steady over the last several months. So again, this would reference item 703 is eliminating the 0.5K position that needs to be done first, and then the creation of a full-time kindergarten position, and then 7.06 is the approval of that actual person that would move from half-time to full-time. Any questions on enrollment or other comments from the board?
Do you have just any take on why the big change in South? What happened? Where'd the kids come from?
Yeah, that's interesting. South has been decreasing in their number of students for the last couple of years, and we've seen smaller. I'm not sure why suddenly we have a larger group. I think there is one thought that some families chose not to send their child to kindergarten last year just because it was virtual to start the year, and they decided maybe to wait another year, and maybe that's a reason. But I don't know that we have a definitive answer to that. Okay. Public, any comment on enrollment or staffing? Okay. All right. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Boyd now. We're losing the battle of time here with finance.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I wanted to spend just a few moments talking with you about transition planning. This is a topic that came up during our special education presentation, I believe in March, and then it is an area that we focus upon in the special education plan as well. We spent time through the spring really exploring and investigating the programming that we offer. So several things. There are 3 primary focuses under transition planning that impact our students ages 14 and older with regard to special education. And you can see the 3 areas that are listed there. Then there's a section within the IEP for our students where this information needs to be articulated for every child. And really, these are goals, again, aligned through federal law that we need to provide a continuum of services as well as a robust program for our students that can remain with us until the age of 21. So what we've taken a look at, we do provide programming, but we want to expand upon those experiences for our students. And what we would really like to do is begin to bring those experiences back into Perkiomen Valley School District so that we don't have to expend money paying contracted services to provide those services. So we spend a significant amount of money right now through contracted agencies and with the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit to provide the services and the programming for our students. We would like to further extend what we offer. We have done that, and I'll show you a slide that shares just some of the things that we're currently doing. What we are doing right now is having conversations with our maintenance department as well as our cafeteria services to see what can we do here at the high school to provide those types of work experiences for our students. So those are some things that we'd like to expand upon. The other thing that we'd like to look at is what has existed in the past is our FCS space, our Family Consumer Science, which we no longer offer here at the high school, but we do have those spaces that could be converted so that we could offer our own cooperative apartment program here at Perkiomen Valley. Right now, that service, we have to go to the intermediate unit and contract and pay for that service so that our students can get that experience. What we look at is the projected enrollment. So we have students that are of transition age, 14 and older, but then we also have students who will remain with us until the age of 21. What this shows you is that that number is anticipated to grow over the next 4 years. And these are the number of students that are currently here within the school district. It shows you in parentheses, that they accounting for the 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26, the 9, 12, and 17, that we will be adding 5, then losing 2, add 5, lose 2, so just so you can see that. Right now, those students are currently absorbed into current caseloads with the staff that we have at the high school. We are anticipating that by the time we get to the 24-25 and 25-26 school year, those caseload size will be beyond what the state allows. So we will need to talk about staffing and what that might look like. I am not at this point suggesting additional staff members. It could be that we could reallocate staff that we already have. But again, this is just information to the committee and the board members about this information and some of the data points that we are currently looking at. This is really just a list of the current resources and offerings that we provide to our students. And again, I'm not going to read all of them, but it does list what we're currently doing. These are some of the additional experiences that we've put into place primarily for our life skills students and our autistic support students. Again, the Perk Up Cafe, that's the coffee cart. We have mail delivery services at the high school. Last year, I believe our classroom earned a foundation grant for like a Cricut machine so that they're creating pins and selling those. And then we are now creating a service delivery website so that teachers can basically issue work requests so that the work can be done throughout the high school. These next few slides actually show you some of the work that we've done over the course of the spring. We went out and talked with 3 school districts within within Montgomery County Montgomery County to learn about what are they doing for their transition services. This slide here just gives you the basic information about Perkiomen Valley, and this is from the 21-22 school year. I stuck with this information because that's the information we have from the other districts. You can see our enrollment, the number of students that are in our intensive programs, and the number of 18 to 21-year-old students that we had last school year. At this point in time, we do not have any program positions to support transition services. I'll get to that in a minute. And what the jobs that we currently perform are housed here at the high school, and we do not have transportation that takes us out for the students here on campus because it's not needed in the present structure. With that being said, we took a look at 3 districts, and this is what you can see in terms of their enrollment. So they range anywhere from 900 students to 2,000 students. You can see their enrollments, the number of 18 to 21-year-olds, and then the types of positions that they have. All of these districts have a transition coordinator, they have job coaches, and then you can see 2 of the 3 schools have some additional staffing that they've indicated. They start with the local school building for services, then they branch out to their campus district-wide, and you can see that they also then have community partnerships. All 3 of these districts started where we are right now. And the reason that they expanded to do this was so that they could bring that funding back into the school district and not outsource it basically to the IU or to other contracted services. And then as well, you can see where, when the program started. So the district number 3 has been operating the longest at 7 years, and then the other 2 districts were in the 2018 school year. Dr. Russell, you might need to advance that. So what I've done in this slide is really just took Perkiomen Valley School District, put it side by side, and what you can see is where we are. In red is if, as a committee and a board, we wanted to consider extending and expanding our program, these are the things, the positions, and the costs that we would need to look at. So what we are currently doing, we can continue to expand. Like I said, we're talking with maintenance, we're talking with the cafeteria. We can extend those experiences here at the high school, but we're not able at this present moment in time to expand beyond the high school. That is what we would like to ultimately do. A transition coordinator would be about $56,000. I apologize, that 0 on the end should be a parenthesis, and it's not. $56,172 would be the salary. For a transition coordinator, it would be on the teacher contract. A job coach is typically would be in the area of like the confidential secretary. They tend to make a little bit more than a paraprofessional would, and we would estimate the cost to be about $23,000 for a salary. To do this, if we wanted to then expand the job variety beyond just the high school to campus district-wide, then we would need to look at contracted transportation with STA or have a conversation about purchasing a van. That's the cost for 1 year for transportation services if we were to contract with STA. And if we were to do something this year, what we would need to do, again, to expand beyond the high school, we would need to talk about a job coach and transportation. Ultimately, we would want to add a transition coordinator position as well. So those are You know, we're not looking to move this forward. It's not an agenda item looking for approval this evening, but I would like it to open up to see if anyone has any questions about this information shared this evening.
I have a quick question. What is the current, well, actually I have two questions. What is the current FCS space being utilized for now? Or is it just sitting there?
It is currently being used, I believe we do use it for some of the preparation for like the Perk Up Cafe. What we would have to look at is an updating of the items that are there. So again, there's ovens, there's dishwashers. We don't know right now the current functionality of that, so to speak. And we have started to talk about what costs might be to potentially renovate that space. We need to talk with our maintenance to see if we would be able to do the work in-house and maybe build, for example, walls to maybe section it off to create a kitchen space versus a living space versus like a bedroom.
Other than Perk Up Cafe, though, it's not being used for like small group anything, or like they're not using it for classroom type of activities.
I don't believe so, Dr. Russell. They are.
I'm just curious then where those would go, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, currently they do offer some OT and PT in there and some small group instruction for our intellectually disabled students periodically throughout the day.
I guess that would be the question, is then where would they go? And then my other question is do you have any examples of the different community-based jobs that where you would be transporting students to in the area?
We would need to start working with our community partnerships to develop that. We do have some ideas. We know we have the food pantry. We have been working with the Chamber of Commerce so that we can begin to talk about that. We envision that would be 2 years out. That would be the 23-24. If we were to start something this year, we would look for campus and district-wide and then expand to community partnerships for the 23-24 school year.
Mrs. Mayers?
Thank you. First, thank you, Dr. Boyd and Dr. Russell, for working on this in the special education department, because this is an area that I believe, needed to improve upon and fortify and offer our students who are in need of transitional support. So I really appreciate this. Dr. Campley actually asked one of my questions about the transportation, but I'm also looking at your areas of focus, cafeteria and maintenance. And I know, Dr. Boyd, that you work, in this area and presume competence. I would love to see us also think about soft office skills and possibly even technology. So not, just presuming competence in all areas instead of picking areas that students with intellectual disabilities are placed a majority of their time. But I really appreciate the district looking at this, and I look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the board? Anyone in the community? Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe Dr. Russell's got you're going to bring it home for us, right?
That's right. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Okay, so we have to talk about our health and safety transition plan and how we will start the school year. I shared with the board, we had a meeting with representatives of Montgomery County Office of Public Health last week and some superintendents from Montgomery County. What the county has expressed to us, and it's all tentative, there is no updated guidance yet. It's not published on their website, but they are indicating no contact tracing, no quarantining. They're planning to eliminate MTS or TTS, test to stay, mask to stay, not hold schools accountable for those programs. They can certainly be considerations, and we always afford individuals in our school community opportunities to wear masks, to receive a more sophisticated respirator if they choose to do it. But the county is indicating that they are moving away from some of those things. I have suggested in our plan, we're currently at a medium level, and this is what that means. So before I get to what I'm going to suggest, let me finish up on this slide. This slide provides information to the community and to the board about how those levels are determined by the CDC. We're currently at a medium level, and you can see how CDC is focusing in the event we are in medium, and that would be the information, the bullets over here. Moving to the next slide, as I mentioned, Montgomery County has not updated their guidance, but they are working on that. They anticipate that maybe by the middle of August, they'll have some updated guidance. And the only requirement, they're thinking of shifting recommendations to considerations, the only obligation that we have is isolating for 5 days when we test positive or we're diagnosed with COVID. We are obligated to isolate or stay out of school for 5 days. Individuals, that will be communicated to individuals. That's really the only requirement that the county is stressing to us right now. We will continue to offer opportunities to vaccinate and booster as we've been doing, open to working with various organizations in our community to do that. We will also encourage symptom monitoring. People shouldn't come to school or work if they're not feeling well. Ventilation is something that's getting a lot of press too, and we've talked with our maintenance department, Mr. Weaver and Mr. Fabrizio, about our ventilation systems. You will see in the plan, we will maintain that maintenance schedule. We will maintain the sophisticated filters for now. There's stress on that. Continue to provide hand sanitizer and encourage hand washing. We follow cleaning protocols. And then the masking and the testing is what is predicted right now to change a little bit. I am recommending that the board consider where we were when we left off, optional masking or recommended in high, but optional, not required. And moving through the plan, you'll see the language around physical distancing has shifted a little bit. I'm looking for guidance around that. There's not much out there right now about social distancing. There's less stress and focus on that particular mitigation measure versus some others. We will follow the guidance, or any code anyway, and look to the guidance of Montgomery County Office of Public Health. There were just a couple of other things that I wanted to call out. When it's mentioned in the plan, the district will uphold applicable policies that are part of the Montgomery County Office of Public Health code and work with nurses on doing that. Right now, contact tracing will not be a requirement of school districts, nor will quarantine. The county really was encouraging of individuals coming back to school. We will communicate with our community about the requirements around isolation. And the other thing I wanted to mention to the board that is being recommended as part of this plan is that communication from the school district will not be via that COVID dashboard, if the board agrees with that. And instead, we will follow the threshold prompts that the county is working on. So right now, they suggest that when there are 3 cases in a setting, and whether that setting has 25 in it, a classroom, or 600, a gymnasium and a pep rally, that letters have to go home to parents. They're rethinking that and considering a percentage threshold. So what I would recommend to the board is that we follow that when there is knowledge of a positive case or several positive cases, whatever that threshold ends up being, that we would certainly send those letters home. And they are modeling that system after other responses to contagious diseases like whooping cough and like chickenpox. So I would suggest to the board we do the same thing. And then the only test to anything program that I am recommending we maintain is the test to participate, where last year we did experience challenges for some of our winter track athletes running at colleges. If they weren't vaccinated, they weren't permitted to participate. However, colleges then did shift and say, if you have a positive test result, then you can participate. So I am recommending we... Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. A negative test result, thank you. If they have a negative test result, then they are permitted to participate. So I'm recommending we keep that so that staff and students who may be in that predicament don't lose out on those opportunities. I mentioned in some conversation with individuals that I was talking about the plan with, it went out to employee group leadership and nurses and Drexel is still requiring masks in school. So there are still mask requirements. There are still different ways of operating under the circumstances of our pandemic, the pandemic. I'm recommending test to participate remain so that our students can participate in those college experiences, especially with winter track. That's where we really felt it last year. And we have the tests, so we're able to actually follow through and accommodate when asked. And I will open it up to any questions on the part of the board.
Yeah, tell us about the religious exemption for parents who decide that this medical procedure should not be administered to their children.
The medical procedure around vaccination?
Of masking.
Oh, masking. Oh, I recognize how strongly you feel about that, Mr. Keenan. I don't have an explanation for that. I don't have an answer that's based in any of the guidance or the literature that I've reviewed. I am proposing to our board that at this point, masks are a choice on the part of individuals, and we will provide a more sophisticated mask, but not require them.
Yes. The problem, I guess, that I'm trying to address right now is not a present one. It's a past one, could be a future one. Is there an exemption written into this policy at some level? An exemption procedure? What is the exemption procedure? Yeah.
The exemption procedure was null and void when masks stopped.
But it's still in here, yes?
No, it's
No.
not. It was eliminated.
So, but what about when, isn't there the possibility of remasking if we're in the high?
No.
Or it's just a suggestion?
Just a
for-
suggestion.
Okay.
I think what Mr. Keenan is talking about, if I may.
Well, we're just coming out of the lawsuit. And
Yeah.
by the lawsuit, I just mean we've just been released to alter our health and safety plan. So it hasn't been changed yet.
No.
It was changed.
So-
We were released from it several months
So
ago.
it was changed to our amended version.
Correct, but what Mr. Keenan is talking about is a certain lawsuit went back to a health and safety plan that didn't have an exemption.
Right.
Well, let me rephrase that. That had a different type of exemption that he might be thinking about. So the current health and safety plan doesn't have an exemption for masking because there's nothing in the current health and safety plan or the current health and safety plan that's running right now that has a mandate for masking. What you're thinking of.
And there's no possibility that we would follow Montgomery County Health Department to put on masks.
So that's a board decision as well as a recommendation from administration. So right now, the county is not requiring masks. They are supporting the recommendation when in a high level of transmission.
I mean, I don't want to have dictate what you do at all in terms of absolutely controlling. I'm in so far as I'm concerned with those parents and children if we come to pushing masks back on. And I mean, for all the kids that had exemptions, what happens to those kids? Are we back at square one?
I see. I understand the question better now. I actually,
I'm not looking for the worst, but
I understand.
I don't want to totally rest on my laurels and lose all that experience that we gained.
Yeah. As I envision the uncertainty that lies ahead, I am certainly optimistic. I think the county Office of Public Health is too. That was my takeaway last week, Thursday. So right now, I don't see it necessary to have an exemption form in the plan because there is not a suggestion we go back to universal masking at this point. I would come to the board again if circumstances change and become serious. I would ask the board to convene, if necessary, prior to when a scheduled board meeting was to occur, if circumstances warranted that. But right now, I don't see that.
But I would think anybody who previously had an exemption and they had their doctor note and what they needed for that exemption process and they were granted the exemption. I'm assuming that if tomorrow we got an alert that Montgomery County was requiring masks and we voted as a group that we wanted to follow their recommended requiring of masks, that we could honor any of the exemptions that were already authorized.
That would be your decision at that time. At such time as you,
But that's a possibility?
yeah, you would be modifying your plan and based on the then current content of the plan relating to masking.
All right. No, I understand better where we are. I'm glad to talk through it. Also, don't want to, if it was in the future or in the past, there are lots of families that don't know about the order from the court. Are you going to put that in a newsletter, at least a link or something, and a little line, just so that all the families that aren't particularly interested, because just people that are going about their daily lives know it's not hanging over them. You know, a lot of people aren't so interested, but they'd like to know that it's just not hanging.
I will address that in this week's message, yes. Any other questions about the health and safety plan from the board? How about community? Any questions? Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so to wrap it up then, the administration, this was a long education committee of the whole, and please, this will not reflect every month, I promise. We didn't have a July board meeting, so there was a lot more to cover this time. But you can see on the screen now all of the action items that we discussed in the education committee of the whole that we as administration are recommending be moved to the consent agenda today. So I'm not sure what the logistics are of this, if the person who's running the section will then move those. Okay. So we have finished.
So 4.02 is the enrollment report that was covered within the presentation. 4.03 to 4.11 were all committee topics of the whole. Are there any additional questions from board members? Seeing none, I move based on the recommendation to consent items 4.03 to 4.11. Okay.
Yeah, I object to the asynchronous learning, the emergency school days, both of being on consent. I'd like to vote no to those.
4.09 off consent.
It's is it just 4.09? Yeah.
It's 4.09. So
Yeah, I'd
4.09.
like just an opportunity to.
Yep.
4.09 will be taken off of consent. 4.03, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11 are all moved to consent.
Yes.
4.12 is an approval for an exchange student from Spain. The motion is to approve an exchange student from Spain. Are there any questions? Seeing none, move that to consent. 4.13, approval of 22-23 student handbooks. This motion is approved. The motion is to approve student handbooks. Are there any questions? Seeing none, move that to consent, and that ends the education section.
Thank you very much, especially since I forgot to ask you in advance. Ms. Evans-Brockett.
Section 5, business, item 5.01. Mr. Weaver will give the Finance Committee of the Whole report.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. Good evening, everybody. So we have a little bit of a less of agenda than the Education Committee. Nonetheless, just as important, we have an update on the state-approved budget and how it impacts us for 22-23, with some interesting little nuggets to share and some tasks that we have to perform moving forward. We have a security personnel request. Pico Natural Gas Pipeline, Middle School West, we're very happy about that, to bring that forward. We have a Biggest Fan Consulting Group being recommended through the high school administration, and then 3 capital projects associated with the high school auditorium that was previously mentioned about an hour ago. So I'm just going to reiterate why we're here and doing the Committee of the Whole. Obviously, we used to do the Committee of the Whole for the Finance Committee several years ago. and then we morphed back into a committee setting. So this is not unusual for us at this point in time, but this lays out the purpose and the logistics moving forward. And I will try to remember to be the best Vanna White that I can when we ask the public. So for the state budget was passed on July 11th. We had several different versions of that, and as we went through our budget presentations for 22-23, we expressed concern and caution, and the board worked with us from a flexible perspective on showing some of those estimated increases for basic education subsidy and special education subsidy with some forethought based upon average increases over the past couple of years. That served us well. You can tell that our actual budget figures for the special education was $2,716,000. We actually received $2,827,000, which showed a surplus of about $111,000, which is about a 4.6% increase over what we had budgeted. And for the ESB, which is a much larger number, 7.5 million, almost 7.6 million was the final state figure. And we had an approved budget figure of about 7.1 million. So that difference of about $478,000 drives, when combined with the special education, about a $590,000 surplus as we look at where we start for 22-23. It's an interesting nugget to take into consideration. Obviously, as we just talked about, we have some different moving parts and pieces from an expenditure perspective that we have to consider and talk about and discuss. But from a school board perspective and an administration perspective, this report out is a positive influence on us, and it's something to think about as we continue to move forward. Another key component of the passage of the state budget was something that we did not even know existed until the final passage, which was another sum of money associated with the mental health and the hardware physical safety of our school district. And lo and behold, as the calculation went out and these additional components came out, we've come to learn that Perkiomen Valley has received, based upon some of the variables that we do know of an adjusted average daily membership of 5,138, which is reported to PIMS as part of the normal process. We received 176,832 for physical safety improvements and 176,832 for mental health improvements associated with the health and safety of our students here at Perkiomen Valley School District. That total is an additional 353,663. Today, information came out from the state that helps to guide us as part of this process. Both of these grants will flow through the PCCD grant portal that we all know from the state safety grant program from the past couple of years. So we have that set up. We are waiting. We have the direction now from the state, and we have to set forward with a couple of immediate meetings from an administrative standpoint to hash out these different things. There are qualifications. There are different tiers of information that we have to go through and modify. So for instance, it may say that for physical safety, there are a number of different items. There are categories that go across those items. We are trying to figure out if you must meet what's in category 1 in order to go to category 2 on the matrix, in order to go to category 3 on the matrix, or if you can pick and choose where you need to be. Our professional organizations, PASBO, PSBA, are trying to figure out where that is, because we here at Perkiomen Valley, we've been lucky. We have some tier 3 areas along the matrix columns. But yet there are some interesting things in 1 and 2 that we've kind of morphed and handled in different directions. So depending upon the information we get from the state organizations, we might have to modify some of these things. So we do know that we have the task ahead of us from an administrative perspective. And oh, by the way, this has to be in the PCCD system by August 31st. So yes, they approved it July 11th. They have issued the backup that they're still working on today. And we're waiting for clarification, but we have to turn it around fairly quickly and get all of this submitted for this total of $353,663 and tell the state how we're going to spend it by August 31st. So we continue to monitor that, and it's going to take a big hustle for us from an administrative perspective to get that done, to look at all of what our options are, where we're at, and to continue to glean the information from the professional organizations to help guide us on our decisions.
Can you give us any insight?
So the different tier, I did not include the list of the different tiers. So anything for physical safety associated with the hardware and the surroundings within the school. Could be doors, it could be cameras, it could be systems. Some of the systems we already have in place. So we're going to try to bypass those and go on to others for that. Mental health, the listing of the mental health is 3 pages long. It is everything from the mental health of students, mental health of the staff, all different types of things that we're just looking into. So I don't have anything concrete to provide to you.
You already heard me say it, but would riot shields fall under that category anywhere in that safety?
It's possible.
I mean, you know, if people could get down the hallway.
Could be wands. It could be, metal detectors. Could be fireproof glass. Could be anything that would fall under those things that would be deemed physical safety hardware, as we understand it today.
And do we have? Sorry, is this too long? Are we in committee or are we? Well, it's just thoughts on the hardware and things. Can we tell if doors are ajar around the school?
So
I'm not trying to.
So yeah, so once that new system that was just allocated, when does that go in? Will it be in when kids go to school? Oh, wow. Okay. And then come October, if there's a door ajar somewhere in the building, who gets the alert?
As long as it's one of the card access doors, it will show. But if it's a door that does not have card access,
Like the back of the gym?
Yeah.
that's correct.
Tell if that's ajar, and do we have eyes on it?
We have multiple cameras in a lot of those positions, but I'll have to double check that. But right now, if a door is ajar, there is no indication. No electrical indication goes out that says this door is ajar.
Jim, are
Yeah, I was just asking, and something to look at.
Sure.
Are these grants only for things and not for staff?
No, the other component is for staff as well.
I think what we'll do, Mr. Weaver, is we'll review the information that was published today, and I can share that with the board in a summary format for what might be eligible in terms of expenditures. The other thing I want to mention to Mr. Keenan's point about doors is Mr. Fabrizio and I are working on a door audit. We do have concerns about our external doors and questions about them. We're working with 2 companies right now, and we would like to have them come out and audit our external doors, our exterior doors, which are also being re-cored this year, but we want to make sure they shut tight. Dr. Parr has also created signs that we're going to post on the doors, be sure the door is shut tight behind you. However, we want to be sure they're functioning properly, so that is something we're looking into right now.
And when you say staff could, or people could be part of that, that could also be some of where the money comes when we're talking about if we want to hire some of our own within, as far as security?
Yeah, we're wondering about that, yes. That's a real possibility, yes.
That's certainly part of the process. Just received today, so we're going through a lot of those beginnings of the matriculations. Okay, any other comment on that? Any public comment on that? Dr. Weston?
Yeah, Wade Weston, Collegeville Borough. Just an article was forwarded to me from a friend of mine who teaches in a neighboring district regarding locks on classroom doors, and basically asserting that in most cases where there's locks on classroom doors, the locks work from the outside and not on the inside, and suggesting that locking doors from the inside might be a useful safety feature. But it leads, and certainly this is something to think about, but it leads me to wonder, is there a reason why school doors don't lock from the inside now? Figure if this is a consistent thing, it's probably for a reason. I'm just wondering if anybody has any knowledge of it.
So the fire code. Yeah, so one of the issues from because I did receive the email you sent a couple weeks ago, and I started looking into items, is potentially that's a fire hazard when the door's locked from the inside, and if something happened to the adult in the room, would the students be able to unlock said door? So, I mean, we would have to look at fire code, but I think an indoor door being locked, a door being locked from the inside is a fire hazard.
So just to kind of clarify, and maybe it's a Montgomery County thing, I can tell you that my previous district, our classroom doors locked from the inside, and when one of the situations happened, our doors were to be remain closed at all times, and we had to carry our key with us. So if a student needed to get in, they knocked and they got in. I'm not saying that right or wrong or indifferent, but I'm saying that teachers could lock the doors from inside. They could also put those little plates in the floor, the jammers, but it was not a situation where they could not lock them in from inside. There was always that capability.
We don't have the capability currently on a lot of our doors to lock them from the inside, but we are learning from some of these door experts that that is a consideration that organizations are making now. We lock our doors from the outside and they're keyed, as you mentioned, but we do also have magnets up in the frame of the door so that doors are typically ajar if they're not closed tight, classroom doors. In the event of an emergency, a teacher knows to pull the magnet and the door shuts tight and it's locked from the outside. So that's something that we initiated several years ago, again, based on some information that we were learning about best practices and safety. However, this conversation about inside door locks has emerged recently, in addition to the email and the article from Dr. Weston, as part of some conversations, preliminary conversations with an expert consultant or somebody who knows doors and locks and best practices safety from a manufacturer. So we're looking into that a little bit more, learning more.
I can also say that Mr. Miller, Dean Miller, has been well aware of that and is working his way through those different areas as well. It's a good question. Okay. This leads into item 8.10. We have been doing a lot of legwork this summer between Mr. Miller, Dr. Russell, and myself in regards to adding 8 in-house security personnel onto the Perkiomen Valley School District rolls for the impacting the 22-23 budget year. Obviously, the pros and cons, we've been weighing this. Most of them are pros. We include the certifications and more flexibility with the emergencies, weekends, and summertime activities if they're on our rolls. We are working on defining. We have a draft job role and responsibility. We're, with the addition of Mr. Miller several years ago, it has always been a goal for us to get somewhat to this point in time. We have the hierarchy in place, again, to use our staff in a more efficient manner. To provide the best safety that we can for our students and our staff and the community. And we continue to look at options moving forward with this recommendation tonight to move forward. And our hope is that as our current advanced protection group contract ends on June 30, 2024, we can begin a serious conversation of a 100% in-house security group. But again, tonight, the conversation piece and the recommendation is to add 8 in-house security personnel onto the Perkiomen Valley School District payroll. As a note, we had just talked about the equalized subsidy and the special education subsidy overflows, budget to actual, as a means to help offset that cost this year, because it is an unbudgeted cost for us, but it is something for us to consider. Looking at the hybrid positions, as we've been talking about it, again, it would still be a mix of in-house Perkiomen Valley School District personnel, along with our current contract APC group to man most of these positions. We have about 17 positions on and off on any given day. With the 8 in-house, you could see the cost. You could see 1 permanent Perkiomen Valley School District security personnel in each building, 2 at the high school, The supervisor would emanate from the high school with the costs associated. These would be 260-day a year full-time job positions for us with benefits, and you can see the cost moving out, which includes PSERS, FICA, workman's comp, unemployment comp, and health insurance benefits, access to our health insurance benefits. The total for that program is $632,241, and there is one more line item there. We are deducting the net reimbursement for the revenue for the PSERS and FICA. So we do get a net cost reduction overall. We would still maintain that commitment with our current contract with APC. They would provide the crossing guards as they currently do, and the costs are extended there. And also additional coverages for about 10 additional positions throughout the school district at different positions. So it would still continue to be a mix, specifically here at the high school, with the number of security on any given day between Perkiomen Valley School District employees and APC as it currently stands. Total package for everything, the 8 positions in-house plus the other positions as listed on all APC with the current contract that we have, total $937,649. You can tell that we already have about $537,000 budgeted, which is $512,000 plus as base plus $25,000 for the security for overnight for our after-school activities. And therefore, the actual impact, if we were to move forward with the 8 in-house and the hybrid coverage, would be about $400,000. Again, that $400,000 you can match roughly up with the equalized subsidy payment and the special education overpayments as well from the state as an offset. Again, it comes recommended, and we can also just say it comes out of unassigned fund balance, and then see how these numbers work their way out through. We do have one heck of a climb for us internally to move forward. We've got the job description in hand, and we've got to get out, we've got to interview, we've got to do all that kind of process. And we do envision that we would move forward as quickly as possible, but probably not have all 8 of these positions in hand until at least probably somewhere around December. That gives us a little bit of time to move forward with the interviews, make sure everybody's in the right process. Hopefully sooner than that, but in talking with Mr. Miller, December would be a practical goal. And if we're super at it and we get the right people in the interviews and we can agree on that, perhaps by November. Ms. White.
That's literally the next slide, so go ahead.
So are you done?
Yes.
Okay. I have a bunch of questions about the in-house. So if we can go back to the in-house slide, how are those salaries formulated?
So those salaries are based upon $19 per hour salary.
And that's their current rate?
That is less than the current rate. Because remember, when we pay APC, it's the cost going to the employee plus their overhead.
But the individual that you would be hiring, that rate is more than or less than what they make at APC?
It would be more than.
It would be more than?
Yes.
And is there anything in our APC contract that states that we are unable to directly hire personnel from their ranks?
No, there's not.
And is there, what group would this category of employee be part of?
I believe this would be in the confidential group.
Yeah, the at-will group,
At
yes.
will, yep.
Confidential
Okay.
at-will. Yeah.
So that answers that question. And then the next question on the next slide. So the others that would be contracted employees, not in-house employees, would they report to the in-house employee for that building?
So that's a good question. That's something that we're working our way through. I would say yes at this point in time. However, right now for the 8, once the 3 o'clock time frame, 7 to 3, a person would leave, then the APC coverage at East and West would be there. And so they would report as they do now.
So then as part of their contract between their contracted times for work, would then there be reason or opportunity for them to have to do overtime?
Not necessarily for, you mean the in-house people? That is certainly something that we could talk about.
Because then it would be going against their contracted. Like, how do we deal with that for?
You mean people that would be in-house
Like, if the
also work
expectation
for
would be for
APC?
them to work, if the expectation would ever be for those 8 individuals to have to work above their means of their contract, how would that be handled with regard to their salary and benefits, et cetera?
We would have to identify if they would be allowed to do overtime or not.
Okay, just as a consideration,
Yes.
because sometimes I know that they do take on currently, as a contracted person, more time than the standard amount of time. But I mean, I'm in support of this, bringing 8 in-house and ultimately bringing all of it in-house. I just would like to understand the hierarchy, like the chain of command, and then also that we would have first pick of the people that we would like to have be brought in-house from APC.
So one of the things I'd like to point out that I missed on your first question about who they would report to, we do have a supervisor still maintained the 1 to 9 slot at APC. So as it would work the same as it works now. There is a supervisor on staff on APC during the day and at nighttime, and that's how they would report through.
And that's fine for the APC people, I guess, but our people would not report.
No, they would report to Dean Miller.
Okay.
Yes. And work through with the principals oftentimes. That would be the case. Mr. Keenan.
And who's going to write the procedures and make decisions about whether we have any firearms, if we maintain any on persons, in a cache? I mean, I'm assuming that comes before us, it comes before the superintendent. I don't know.
That's not what this is calling for. This isn't calling for any SRO officers or anyone to actually have a firearm. That's a discussion we can definitely have as a board that comes with different certifications for the individuals that are in the building, but that's not what 810 is asking for.
All right, so yeah, I mean, some of these people might have that certification. We just don't know. It's not a part of this. Is that okay?
Definitely something we can talk about.
It's certainly Mr. Keenan.
Something we should, we should talk about it.
And certainly we would need to know that moving forward from a liability perspective as well for insurance purposes. So.
To Mr. Keenan's point, I think if we look at the schools around us, Springford has SRO officers. I think Methacton does, Souderton, etc. So it's definitely something we could potentially talk about at the next committee meeting.
I thought we heard Methacton is moving away from that, but if Mr. Miller has a pretty comprehensive listing of schools around here. Somebody gave him vacation. I don't know who, because he needed to recharge, apparently. So he's got a pretty comprehensive list of schools that he's looked around in the local areas that we will share.
Yeah, well, just to finish that thought, which, we've all been seeing it and we've all been having these conversations, at least internally. One of the main reasons I hear on every broadcast, every station, regardless of whatever news station you're looking at, is because people choose schools because they're soft targets. And that's a major consideration for people that choose their targets. And so anyway, I think it's really important. And my thinking doesn't go to arguing about it so much. Well, what's that worth? I mean, we're talking about, lives. It's more like this, in my mind too, I'm having the full discussion because I want the kids safe. I mean, even if our the head officer had access to a cache or something, in a building or in several buildings, or we know, and maybe we all don't know, but the law was amended and passed and updated recently by Governor Wolf to allow for officers with certifications to carry in schools, and that's a pretty rigorous program, I think. Those people are the most responsible in Pennsylvania with firearms. So I think we should seriously consider at some point having them having them on site as a deterrent. It's a major deterrent. That's it.
Good point, and very valid in today's world. Okay, any other board questions? Any public comment? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so moving forward, ESCO 4.0, item 5.08 on tonight's board agenda. Finally, some good news on moving forward with the natural gas pipeline at ESCO 4.0. This is to move forward. We've been working with PICO over the years. For those who have known about this, we've been quoted all different kinds of prices from PICO. Finally came in with some credits, additional credits to offset that cost. The cost is $207,000. That is one of the better prices that we've seen for this. And again, the purpose of this is to get a natural gas pipeline up to West to take that building from heating oil, which is very expensive, which we all know, to go firm natural gas. And to the ESCO 4.0 has monies in it set aside to remove the old boiler, which is the heating oil boiler, and put in a natural gas boiler, much more efficient. Here is Mr. Mowry as our ESCO consultant. When we looked at the numbers, this is an incredible return on investment for the $207,000. Return total, the whole package, of about 2 years. There's not much that I'm going to bring forward to you in my entire career that has a return on investment such as this. This is really a no-brainer from our perspective, and I would strongly recommend this. And again, it's board agenda item 5.08. One other point to note, we did work with Lauren Chesney as our lead group. We did contact several of the developers up there, which was another process that we looked at to try to help offset some of the cost. That was not successful. To help with that, they continue to want things from us, and we're moving our way through that, but not associated with this natural gas pipeline. So we did the effort.
Yeah, but there's still a 3-year recapture period. So if someone were to tap into the line that we're paying for, we would recoup cost.
Yes.
And just another note is the actual cost of the installation of the line is $674,000. Our contribution is $207,000, and the offset is our future use of gas.
Yes, and a commitment. PICO wanted a commitment for a certain amount of TCFs, and Mr. Mowry did the calculation, and we can meet that TCF requirement. So again, really, any comment on that from the board? So, we talk about how happy we were that we had July off. Well, the whole, we made that decision, and then June 8th, they said, okay, you have 60 days to figure this out. So we need the board motion tonight.
Action on this
Yes.
item tonight because we have to return.
Yes,
And return
exactly.
the executed agreement.
Yes. So this is a motion for tonight. Thank you for that. So once we get it in, it'll be scheduled. We're hopeful that sometime during the fall, but the one holding factor is still that the DEP license, because it has to go over the little bit of the watershed there when it gets down at the bottom of the hill and then go back up. So that might delay it a little bit. So probably not savings as far as heating this year, but we'll be lucky if we can get it in by March. That would be a goal. That would be great.
The other question that I had was when I didn't fine tooth comb the agreement, but my question associated with the 200 and change, that's actually just for the pipeline. And then there's verbiage in there about the labor to do the road and whatnot.
Yeah, there is actually a cost in there for the removal of the actual middle school west boiler. That's all part of the ESCO 4.0.
But I'm talking about the actual damage to the road from Wawa to the middle school west. Did I misunderstand that?
That's all part of the, yeah.
Any extraordinary rock or other unanticipated conditions, that they would be an upcharge.
Okay. I guess the way that I read it, that 2 and change was really just for the pipeline, not for any of the construction work to get into trench.
The 207 is our portion, as Mr. Suber said, for the construction of that pipeline.
We're just paying a portion of it.
All right, I read it different. It's probably just how I read it, but that's fine. And so then, with regards to overages of time, is there, aside from conditions, is there an like a not to exceed protection for us? Or are they allowed to just come back once we execute the agreement and say, well, now it's going to be 500,000?
Not as long as we, it's my understanding, as long as we meet the 60-day criteria, we lock in.
Okay, thank you.
And not that I have anything, I do have something to add, because I know a little bit about these contracts, and maybe actually it got picked up on, and maybe it's part of this contract or not. Maybe this contract's a little longer than the typical ones, but when they get on your property, and maybe this was what was picked up on, they don't repair a sidewalk or the asphalt, your asphalt, when they go under it, just so you know.
Oh, that's right.
That's your job. So yeah, I think they do all the road work, so, and they fix that up to spec, but when they get to your property, it's on you.
It's going to be our installation.
And they try not to, you know, they try to route it in your property or along the grass and get to where, you know, you're going to set up the meters and whatnot. But still, you know, if they have to go under something, there might be, yeah, of course, some additional costs.
Okay, we'll keep the board abreast of those.
Well, we got to vote on
Potential
that.
costs.
You're asking us to vote on it tonight, so can we pull it
Right.
up real quick? 8:10. Well, I want to see what Mrs. White was looking at too, to make sure we're all on the same page.
I mean, as far as I believe, she's referring to section 2.1, second paragraph. It's talking about additional expenses.
I think my main concern is that in contracts of a service like this, in my experience, not specifically related to PICO, this contract is in PICO's best interest for them to provide the service to us. So I just wanted to make sure that if there's additionals to the point of property that needs to be considered, or
I've done a couple of these on properties. I mean, not that that doesn't mean, just a couple.
It says our school district is responsible to perform and pay for all paving and final restoration work required on customers' premises after installation by PICO. Correct.
and then should any other premises be disrupted along the route, like would then the school district, since we initiated this, be responsible for that?
Yeah, I think it's up to them on their line. And the other thing is I would bring it forward as a kind of a change order. That's how I would look at it. We have the original contract. and
Oh,
then
we
if
can
there's
look at it as
additional
a
rock-
change order, but we can't just approve indefinite change orders, just like we wouldn't do that with a regular project.
Absent unusual or extraordinary conditions, what you're referring to is their responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
So say a neighbor's driveway gets messed up.
PICO.
That's PICO's responsibility, not ours. We're just responsible for, say, the driveway of the school district. Okay.
Prepared to get that fixed at the same time, but we don't have a cost figure for that.
We could figure out what the we got to see what the damages are first. Right.
So it's something that could be, they could go along a grass line, or they could end up ripping up the entire parking lot.
Correct.
We just have no idea.
Joe.
Okay. Perfect. So it wouldn't disrupt anything where people are entering the school? Okay. And it wouldn't disrupt, hold on. That's her last name. Tracy, forgive me, I apologize. I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tracy Tesfaye.
Go ahead. You just where do you live? Meaning like Skipback, Collegeville?
Oh, Collegeville.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was clicking by mistake. Was I
Oh, no problem. It was very nice talking to you. We'll put
mistakenly
you back on mute.
asked a question? I don't have any input right now.
All good. Thank you so much. So it's not getting back to you. It's not going to disrupt soccer, tennis, baseball, any of the fields back there. Okay, got it.
So, Mr. Subers, in section 2.1 in the second paragraph, when it says if installation costs are more than 10%, exceed the amended by more than 10%, they're talking just to our premises, not if it happens anywhere during their.
Installation of, but it's limited to if they experience unusual or extraordinary conditions during the installation. And that increases their cost by more than 10%, then we're responsible. We're assuming that 10% is covered.
But we don't know what they're going to, until they start digging, we're not going to know any issues they might have, correct?
No, unusual and extraordinary conditions is ambiguous, but it is a term of art in construction, so they would have to show that it was unusual to the area.
Mm-hmm.
So like a major bed of rock
Yeah,
that
like you should
where they can't
anticipate
drill
rock,
down.
clay and rock in this area. It's if they ran into some bedrock or something that would be unusual.
But I assume they would.
Unusual to the character of this area.
Yeah. So so this is Lower Frederick, correct?
Yes.
So I assume they've been in contact with the township at Lower Frederick, and they have an understanding of what the expectations of going to be in the ground there.
They should, yes. I mean, their examples are rock formation, underground utility lines, historical artifacts.
Mhm.
If they run into some Indian arrowheads, and they have to stop and deal with historical preservation.
In my conversations with Lauren, we reviewed the contract. He seemed to be okay with it.
I mean, it's a typical concept.
Yeah.
They want to get us this gas and start pumping it.
They want to sell gas.
Yeah.
How long? So you're talking about putting in a new boiler, removing the old boiler. I assume the redundancy is that students would always have a boiler running.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, probably the boiler replacement will take some time. They've got to order it now that we're moving forward with it. So there has to be that supply chain thing. And we probably would wait until April or May, take the boiler offline, demo the old one, and then put the new one in next summer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now, as far as this process goes, Mr. Saylor, you mentioned, do you want to vote now, or you want to wait? I'm going to wait. Oh, go ahead.
Hold on, I just want to address that. No, this is a committee of a whole, so we're not doing that. We're
Okay.
going to go through, and then once we're done this section, Ms. Evans-Brockett will
Gotcha.
continue on. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I should have probably written down my questions for you. With regards to the discretion of when this work will actually be performed, I'm assuming it'll be through set hours. Have you had that conversation with anyone yet?
We have to approve the contract and send it back to PICO, and then we'll get down to business.
Okay, so it's premature. Okay, that's
Yep.
fine.
Pipeline, that's a long road.
Okay, any public comment on that? Okay, all right. Biggest Fan Consulting. It has come highly recommended from the high school administration that they want to hire Biggest Fan Consulting firm to come and offer training, collaboration with our student leaders for our sporting events. We know that we have great passion. This is a slide that Mr. Burke and I worked on. We know that they have great passion, and Mr. Burke, of course, leads a lot of teamwork amongst the students. Be positive, sustain year-long support of all of our teams. We know that they do attend a lot of our sports, and the Biggest Fan group will come in. They will lead various student leadership programs that Mr. Burke thinks is invaluable for our students to learn, to move forward, and to keep them as leaders in the public eye for these events that happen. The cost is $5,800 for this year, and it would be supported and paid through by fundraising through the high school. And it is recommended by the administration as well. It is board agenda item 5.13. Any questions from the board? Ms. White?
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Do we know of other districts that use this service?
Mr. Burke did send a listing of schools, but the closest one was Lancaster.
My concern would be their top model is to pay students to be student leaders in student sections, and I'm just totally against paying students to attend football games or attend any event that the school's doing to be a leader. I don't think paying someone is a good thing for a leader to have.
I feel like in general, I need more information about this program before I were to say anything in general.
So, am I understanding my perception of this program is to not get students to participate, but it's to help them understand and cultivate proper decorum during these events?
Yep.
Okay. So I guess based on that, that's why I asked if there's comparable school districts. Like I know, for example, Central Bucks has very passionate student sections that are led by students, et cetera, with different themes and all that. And I understand that there are times that those sections are not appropriate for whatever reason. So this is to try to combat that here at PV, but I'm wondering where the track record of the success of it is. That's what I'd like to see. So Lancaster to me is not a comparable offering.
Okay, all right. Yeah, all right. We'll get it. We'll provide it in a Thursday memo.
And additionally, I'm sorry, just as a thought, so it's because so student handbook does not cover behaviors during these types of events currently?
The student handbook would cover anything that is a school-sponsored event on premises or even field trip off campus. So the handbook would cover that. It is, as you just described, it is really to build upon the strengths that our students possess, the passion that they have for these events, and to support them.
Harness it in a positive way.
Exactly. To cultivate a positive approach and interaction. Yep, exactly.
Their number one model is to pay a student. How can we ensure that that doesn't happen if we don't want that to happen? Or do we want that to happen?
I am not supporting that recommendation, and I think Mr. Weaver and I would have to go back to Mr. Burke to see if that's something that they're interested in that has not been brought to us at this point. So I'd like to explore that further with Mr. Burke, and we could update you in the memo this week with some information about it. That would be helpful. I don't believe that's the intent. Oy.
Okay, so we've got some work to do on that one. Any other board comments? Public? No? Okay. All right, high school auditorium project. You might win, Lori. Items 5.14, 5.15, and 5.16. This is the continuation of the conversation in regards to making our high school auditorium a little bit more friendly. 5.14 is for Pittsburgh Stage to come in and fix the safety rigging on the auditorium at a cost not to exceed, a co-star's cost not to exceed $12,000. And there's a description listed there, and there's capital project money available to do that. Board motion 5.15 is a continuation of the stage light crew on a one-to-one basis upgrade, and the power controls as well, with house fixture upgrades and stage fixture packages as well, and a couple of LED spotlights at an estimated cost of $228,000. It's an estimated cost because tomorrow we actually have the electrician to come in and verify a lot of these runs. We've been meeting with this group several times. And so tomorrow we're moving forward with the electrician coming through and verifying the estimates that they've already provided to us. We do know, as Mr. Subers had mentioned, that this will be a prevailing wage job as well. And the prevailing wage figure is included in the estimate. So, notice it's just an estimate. We'd like to move forward with that and then verify that number when we finally get the electrical drawings back. Board motion 5.16 is to approve CM Eichenlob to upgrade the seats in the high school auditorium. We all know that those plastic orange, yellow, and red things have had quite a life, but it's time to replace them with 50 chairs in the first row that will have ARM tablets associated with the ability for students to sit there and do their work, and 500 other chairs to be replaced without the ARM chairs. And the reason that we're doing that is because in order for the ARM tablet arm, to fit in there, we would have had to extend the rows, which is not possible. So we would have lost an awful lot of seating, number one. Number two, we would have had to do some major work and major dollars into the concrete just to extend some of those aisles, and that was not practical for us. So 50 with arms, 500 just simply replaced with a much more comfortable chair. Again, both of those projects through capital project. Any questions on that? Dr. Campley.
With these upgrades, would the high school musical be able to be performed there, possibly with additional showings in order to fit the amount of people to come see it? But will it be up to par for them to be able to have their performances on their home base like they used to?
So I would have to defer that to someone a little bit more knowledgeable than me on plays and what they need.
I think we need to continue those conversations. Right now, East is the preferred venue. However, we also did have plans to sand down the stage and refinish the stage and maybe make access a little bit smoother, those steps that lead up to the stage. So there are some things that we'll continue to work on and engage in those conversations. I would say anything's possible. I'm not sure what the preference is, though, but we're hoping that it's more appealing. And even the fall play, I'm sorry, there's a fly. I'm sorry about that. I think that would be possible with this venue once it's upgraded.
I think that's great. I think it's something definitely to aspire to so that the high school can have their own location and we can move it back here versus East. But I think those are great. It definitely doesn't need to have a larger stage. The stage is a fine size, but I can understand the accessibility with those steps and sanding it down. So I'd like to hear more moving forward of how we can get that up and running.
Mrs. White.
My question was with regard to the seating that is currently in the high school auditorium, whether or not there's been any discussion of either recycle or upcycle of those particular chairs. Is there anything that's been done to find out if we can actually send those somewhere and have them repurposed in any way, or what's the trash plan for those?
So we can actually talk to CM Eichenlob about that to see if they can reuse them. I don't know from a color perspective, but
So I guess where I'm getting at, and it may not exist, I'm happy to do a little legwork in finding out the information as well and passing it along. I'm sure the manufacturer has no need for our chairs and they don't want anything to do with them. I'm really thinking more along the lines of an environment that they actually could be repurposed in that is maybe without chairs as nice as those.
good point. We'll bring that up and talk about that. One other component to this is CM Eichenlob. That gentleman will be working with us to create the entire program because timeline is going to be so important for these projects. The board remembers in June we actually approved the Franklin flooring part of this. So all four components, the ordering, the moving forward with it, all of that kind of stuff, that all has to be done and brought together. So that's going to be a tedious task for us, especially if we desire to get that done during the school year.
So is Eichenlob's number then inclusive of a project manager assigned to this particular job? And is Mr. Fabrizio going to be overseeing their project manager?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, any public comment? Okay. All right, so for just a summary, for the consent agenda, 5.13 will not be on consent. We've got some work to do on that one. That's the student section consulting group. 5.14, 15, 16, and 8.10 will be on consent. Additionally, items 5.07, 5.09, 510, and 511, we'd also recommend to go on consent. We didn't talk about it in Finance Committee the whole, but those are pretty straightforward items for us to consider. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver.
Yes, Mrs. Evans-Brock.
No, I said thank you.
Okay.
Oh.
Question?
Thanks, Jim. Considering that this is part of the safety and operations at this point, the last safety and operations meetings, we were talking about the crosswalk study. We're coming quickly up onto the fall. The crosswalk looks identical to what it did previously. Can we have an update on that, and also any follow-up on the bicycles? Because a lot of people are really interested in that, and we want to know what's going on.
Sure. So for the crosswalk, we filed the HOP permit with our engineering firm. They've submitted those documents to the township, and the township is working their way through them. Now we've got to get to the point in time that we've got to look at what the township says back to us as far as the access points, and then we've got to have a bid process for getting those access points done. So it doesn't look like it'll be done for the start of school year at this particular point in time. But we continue to move forward on that. The other piece was the bicycle study. I have nothing new to report on that. That's been an item that Mr. Miller and I have been working on with various principals, but we have nothing to report at this time. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we will vote on item 5.08 momentarily. We are keeping 5.13 off of consent, but are there any other questions or discussions for any other items in section 5, or can we move those all to consent?
You said 5.13 we're taking off, correct? Okay.
Okay, so at this point, everything except 5.13 will be moved to consent, and we'll vote now on 5.08, which is a motion to approve the general gas service agreement with Pico Energy, and I so move.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? None. All in favor, say aye.
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 Against nay? The ayes have it.
And that completes section 5.
Just real quick, do you want to, just to 5.02, grants and donations? Just a report, that's fine. It's there for, okay. Mr. Fountain, payments of bills?
Let me turn this on. I guess you
Can
can
I
hear me.
just make one comment? I know, so,
It's 518.
well, there are numerous items that weren't listed as consent and weren't listed in the finance report consent agenda summary. Was your question all items? Okay, just
did.
wanted to make sure that the board understood that.
Yep. Go ahead, Mr. Fountain.
Okay. Yeah, item 6.01 and 6.03 are both motions to ratify bills and payroll. One for the first for June 30th, the ending June 30th. The 03 is ending July 31st. So I would so move. Second?
Don't need it.
Second, okay. And 6.02 and 6.04 also are both motions to approve the treasurer's report and financial statements for those same periods, first ending June 30th and then second ending July 31st.
So, Mr. Fountain, if
Yes.
it's okay, I would suggest that we move 6.01 and 6.02 to consent because they already happened, but the other two we have to wait until next week.
Okay.
Just placeholders for the 8th.
Okay.
We're going to move 6.01 and 02 to consent, and then we'll move forward. Mrs. Mayers, if you don't mind, do you want me to do your section since you're virtual?
That would be great.
Great.
Thank you.
No problem. Oh, we haven't got there. I'm way ahead. We're back to Ms. White, professional personnel.
So items, okay, so this one's all mixed up, right? So items 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17 are all on consent. Items 3 and 4 were already moved to consent in the Education Committee of the Whole.
Yep.
14 is a placeholder, 18 is a placeholder, and 19 is a placeholder. And that, I missed 5, yes, I'm sorry, and 5 is a placeholder as well. And that ends that section.
Thank you very much. 8.01, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, 9 are on consent. 8.10 was added to consent. It was the from the Finance Committee, approval to create support positions. Mr. Keenan, there's nothing in governance, so that completes your section.
Done.
Dr. Weston, Mr. Legend, any comments? None? Any comments from any board members? Ms. Evans-Brockett, Mr. Fountain, Ms. White, Mr. Keenan, Dr. Campley, Ms. Mayers? Take that as a note. Thank you.
Sorry, I shook my head no. No, thank you.
Thank you to the cabinet, the administration, and the board with working through the new setup. Hopefully we all find it more efficient and we get a little better at it as we move forward. 10.03 is out there for the notice of disclaimer. I'm going to rule adjournment and just note that the executive, that the board had an executive session held prior to the work session for the purpose of personnel and legal. See everybody on Monday night.